Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Wooden country houses have a special atmosphere of tranquility and coziness. They often evoke pleasant memories from the distant childhood, summer, cottage, trips to the river with friends, fresh strawberries, which you pluck right in the vegetable garden. However, wooden houses have one significant disadvantage. They are easily inflammable. One spark from a fire, an unexhausted cigarette butt, or a small short circuit in the wiring is enough to make the whole building burst into flames like a match. What exactly had happened in his case, Damien didn't know, and frankly, he didn't care much about that right now. The only thing he was thinking about was how to get out of the flaming building. The sophisticated locking system on the cottage door seemed to have malfunctioned and locked him inside. As soon as Damien noticed the fire, he rushed to a window, then another, but to his horror found bars on each of them. Modern security methods, expensive alarm systems, police arriving in 5 minutes. The bars on the windows are probably more effective anyway, Damien thought with annoyance. All he could do now was call the fire department, cover his face with a wet rag, and wait patiently for rescue, trying to stay away from the blazing flames and acrid smoke that were quickly filling the rooms. He sat near one of the windows with his back against the wall. And to be honest, he didn't believe he would live longer than a few minutes. There was still one hope left for him, though. No, not the firefighters. Damien was sure they'd never make it out to the middle of nowhere in time. But there was a reason he was in this house, which didn't belong to him, but to his good friend and business partner Adrian. The latter, for some reason, was ungodly late for the meeting, but he could show up at any minute. What could he do, though? He wasn't really going to drag his friend out of a burning house. Damien probably wouldn't do it himself. He's got a family that's going to be left without a breadwinner. The spark of hope that had flared in his soul faded as quickly as it had appeared. Now all of Damien's thoughts turned to his family, or rather, his daughter. She was an adult, but she still needed his help, his tutelage, his guidance, even though she would never admit it to herself. And who was it that made her so stubborn and willful? At the same time, she does not know how to handle money, neither to save, nor to invest, only to spend. It is clear that she is a woman. She needs all kinds of cosmetics, beautiful clothes, and some other things that he, due to gender differences, do not understand. But not in such huge quantities all this is needed. Whether it was because of this, or for some other reason that Damien couldn't determine, his relationship with his daughter was unimportant. She'd become jumpy, sassy. Even as a teenager, she hadn't been this difficult. And now, apparently, they wouldn't be able to rebuild trust. Suddenly, a noise distracted Damien from his thoughts. The crackling of the fire kept him from listening, but he was sure someone was near the house. He wanted to shout, but realized he'd already inhaled the smoke, and his voice wouldn't listen to him. Then, with his last strength, the man drummed on the wall. Hopefully the people walking around outside will hear him and distinguish this sound from all the others, Damien thought. "Hey, is anyone out there?" came someone's unfamiliar voice from right above his head. Damien tried to answer, but only coughed convulsively. Apparently that was enough. Unlike the knocking, this sound was clearly identifiable as human. Wait a second, came the same voice from above Damien's head. There was a crackling sound. Not the kind that came from the raging flames, but a ringing, metallic sound. A second more, and he heard the thud of a heavy object hitting the tiles around the house. Then another, a little quieter. Apparently the unknown guy had ripped out the grate using a makeshift lever. Leaning against the wall, Damien struggled to his feet. His head felt like a fog and he felt wobbly. He looked up and saw a hazy silhouette against the window opening. "Give me your hand," the stranger shouted. Damien, not really knowing what he was doing, straining with all his remaining strength, held out his hands, both of them for some reason, and felt someone squeezing them and pulling him upward. At that moment he realized he was saved, and consciousness left him. Damien must have woken up just a few minutes later to someone splashing cold water in his face. When he opened his eyes, he saw the concerned face of a young boy of about 20, but maybe 25, in front of him. "Well, thank God," he exclaimed. "I thought I was too late." "Thank you," Damien wheezed. "What's your name?" "Alex," he said. "Thank you. Alex, I don't know what I would have done without you. How did you end up here?" "No reason," he answered evasively. "I was fishing on the river nearby." Damien was finally able to look at his rescuer with a more meaningful gaze. Tattered clothes, holey boots. "Fishing? How?" "Unless I was trying to catch fish with my hands so I'd have something to eat," he thought. He did not, however, voice it. Why offend a man who had done nothing wrong to you? but had literally saved you from certain death. He wanted to answer something to keep the conversation going. But then his jacket pocket vibrated suspiciously. Damien didn't even realize at once that it was the phone, which he had habitually set to silent mode for the duration of a business meeting. He glanced at the screen and saw that Adrian was trying to reach him. "I'm listening," he answered briefly. "Dude, here's the deal," the receiver said verbosely. "I'm late. First I got into a traffic jam, and I just got out. The car stopped and won't budge." "Yeah," Damien said thoughtfully. "No luck today. I've got some not-so-good news for you." "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to put this delicately. Have you checked the wiring in the house lately?" "Why?" Adrian's voice didn't sound surprised or concerned. "The fact that you don't have a house anymore," he blurted out, deciding not to pull the cat's tail. Somehow it burned down like that. A fire started. "I don't know what caused it, but I'm guessing it was a short circuit. I'm sorry, I thought you'd rather hear it from me now than come to the ashes unprepared."
I guess you're right. Wait for me, please. I'll try to get there as soon as I can.
Damien hung up the phone and thought hard. Alex stood beside him, looking at him anxiously and seemingly searching for any signs of ill health. The businessman was struck by such concern from a complete stranger, who probably had enough problems of his own. Besides, he was still thinking about his daughter. But how to establish a relationship with her? How could he set her straight? Damien looked at Alex once more, and an idea that seemed strange but still made sense came to him. "Listen," Alex, he began cautiously. "I'm sorry to be blunt, but I can see you're not a rich man, to put it mildly. Probably in need of money and a place to live, aren't you?" "I won't take money," the boy said flatly. "I didn't bring you out here for that, did I? I'm not offering you money. Well, not for rescuing you. I have a business proposition for you." "What's that?" Alex became wary. "I see you're a good guy, kind. And I have a daughter, you know. In principle, she's not a bad girl either, but with a wind in her head, so I thought you might be a good influence on her. Are you trying to match me now?" "Well, that's a long way off, I suppose. But yes, I suggest you get to know her, talk to her, have a relationship, and then it's up to you." "You know, I think I called you an ambulance for a reason," Alex said skeptically. "I think you inhaled too much smoke. But what kind of relationship can I have with a businessman's daughter? What are you talking about? She won't even look at me." She will. Dress you up, comb your hair, you'd look so handsome. You don't need to tell her you're homeless. I'll rent you a car, pay your rent, and other expenses on top of that, for the movies. It'll be your job. You don't need a car, that's for sure." "I don't know how to drive," Alex answered. Despite the fact that he didn't like Damien's proposal, he seriously considered it. He didn't want to deceive the girl, but in his situation it seemed to be the only chance to get money and a place to live. He needed both, not so much for himself as for his ward. Alex knew that the street was a cruel, merciless place on his own skin. He was a young, energetic guy, quite capable of standing up for himself, but there were people here who could not boast such skills. One of them was Matthew, whom they had run into by chance a few years ago. Alex had just graduated from the orphanage and was barely grasping the basics of vagabond life. His new acquaintance was old enough to be his father, if not his grandfather. He never talked about how he ended up on the street, but the boy was sure that it was due to some fatal accident. Matthew was nothing like the typical vagrant. He didn't drink at all. He was pretty weak and often sick. Not exactly the best set of tools for surviving on the streets, especially since in this harsh world it is not customary to help each other. Quite the opposite. Other homeless people saw Matthew as a competitor. They could take away his food, all his money, and drive him away from the warm place he had found. Alex felt sorry for the old man, and he decided to take him under his care and protection. He helped as much as he could. To the best of his modest abilities, he got food and medicine. And to all those who were very interested, he explained that this man was his grandfather. Of course, that wasn't true. But it was a logical explanation for their strange union. "So you agree with everything else?" Damien asked slyly, snapping Alex out of his troubled thoughts. "Well, we could try," carefully he agreed. "That's great," the businessman hummed. "Well, I'll call a driver now. Go with him to the store. Look for some clothes, something decent. And I have to wait for my comrade. I'll take care of business, and we'll go straight to my daughter's." "Maybe I'd better stay with you," Alex asked timidly. "I don't understand anything about these fancy clothes. Maybe you can give me some tips." "It's a waste of time," Damien dismissed him. "It doesn't matter how fancy you dress. You're not a girl. The most important thing is that the clothes are new and expensive. With a heavy heart, Alex agreed. He didn't want to leave the businessman alone. He felt uneasy about him, as if he had a bad feeling about him. He didn't like the fire very much. It didn't look like the house had caught fire from inside because of faulty wiring or something else. Fortunately, his fears were not justified. As soon as he left the store, the driver informed him that the chief had just called. What's more, he had already made it home. His daughter was there too, and both were waiting for the arrival of the groom. Alex felt a strange shiver in his knees. This whole thing kept bothering him. He didn't like it, but there was no choice. As they pulled up to Damien's house, Alex marveled at its modesty. Sure, it was a large 2-story cottage with a very impressive lot, but he had expected something grander, a real mansion, like the aristocrats in the history books. It was how he'd envisioned the life of the rich. The sight of a large and well-built, but quite ordinary, no-frills house even somehow calmed him down, but it didn't last long. The door opened after his call, and a young girl appeared on the threshold. She looked not at the guests, but behind her back. "Daddy, I don't need you to bring any suitors to me," she said loudly. Alex realized this line was not really meant for his father, but for him. It was a warning. Don't get your hopes up, boy. I'm an independent girl, and there's nothing in it for you. Emily, please remember the rules of decorum. Damien's voice came from the back of the house. We have a very serious young man here. You're embarrassing him. The girl sighed and turned to face Alex. He mumbled some prearranged greeting, and their gazes met. At that moment, Emily smirked faintly, but he was stunned. He realized that he had seen her before, and that she recognized him too. He had extremely unpleasant memories of their first meeting. Look, what a guy, a shrill female voice rang in his head. What guy? Just standing there on the corner, some hobo. Emily gave him a scornful look. Several of her friends were with her. The whole company shamelessly stared at him, as if he was not a person at all, but some object of interior. However, Alex suspected that in their picture of the world it was true. So what if he was a tramp? Said one of the girls with a laugh. But he's cute. Would you kiss him, Emily? Emily looked at him again, her expression unchanged. Why would I do that? She asked. Her friends began to answer her question, laughing and throwing snide glances at Alex, who was blushing. He was no longer listening to what was going on. Instead, he tried to get away from where he was standing as quickly as possible. And now that very same girl was standing on the doorstep of Damien's house. She was the one he had come to pretend to be a rich and promising fiancé. And naturally, he was immediately exposed. He could tell from her smirk, from her surprised and mocking look, that she, too, remembered the incident. But Emily, surprisingly, did not pretend to know him. She felt sorry for the poor guy. Or maybe it was guilt. Or maybe she just didn't want to cause another scandal with her father. Anyway, she calmly extended her hand to him and politely introduced herself. Alex answered her in the same way. Together they went into the hall, where Damien was already waiting for them at the festively set table. A casual small talk ensued. In the end, the older man either got tired or decided it was time to leave the young people alone. Either way, he bowed politely and headed upstairs to his room. At the same moment, a friendly smile fell from Emily's face. She listened warily, and when she caught the sound of the door closing, she was furious with Alex. What kind of circus are you running here? I can understand, father, but what are you doing here? Don't you have anything better to do? Emily asked. The boy looked at her dumbfounded. It wasn't that he'd expected a warm welcome, but this sudden change of tone had thrown him off balance. He never would have thought it was possible to fake it so well, and even almost believed in Emily's benevolent attitude. Alex was embarrassed. He didn't know how to approach the main thing. After all, it wasn't just for the money that he'd agreed to Damien's offer. There was another reason, more serious and sinister. He saw Emily as his ally in the predicament he was in, but how could he convince her of that? Look, I'm going to get off to an awkward start. I apologize both for this, as you put it, circus, and for what I'm going to tell you next. Alex began. But I can't not do it. Your father is in serious danger, and I don't know how to help him. That's why I agreed to the adventure. I thought you could do it. Okay, wait, Emily interrupted him. What kind of danger are you talking about? Let's start from the beginning. I don't understand. You see, it seems that they wanted to kill him, and not just wanted to kill him, but tried to kill him, Alex answered. I overheard a conversation between two people who wanted to get rid of their business partner, and in a rather harsh way, burned alive right in the country house, where the negotiations were to be held. Allegedly an accident. Emily listened to him with a mixture of disbelief and horror, but did not interrupt him again. I heard everything, the date and the time. So I went to this very house today, only I was a little late. It was already on fire, and if I hadn't known there was someone inside, I never would have guessed. Anyway, I got him out this time, but something tells me those people won't stop until they're done. Why didn't you tell your father? Emily shook her hands. He would have believed me. But think about it. On the one hand, his business partners seem to be trusted people, friends, probably, as he calls some of them. And on the other hand, I'm some stranger, even without any serious evidence. That's true, Emily said thoughtfully. But you seem to believe me, don't you? I do. You know, I've had my suspicions lately, too, that someone wants to hurt my father. I don't know anything specific, just a feeling or something. Alex felt like Emily wasn't telling him the truth, but really, was it any of his business? He warned her, which means his conscience is clear. We'll see how it goes from here. So Emily said, after a moment's silence, I suspect that this is not the only motive that brought you to our house. Your father must have promised you money for playing the rich groom. Yes, he did, Alex agreed, seeing no point in hiding the obvious. Well then, shall we pretend, she smiled, and keep an eye on Daddy, do you agree? At least for a month, and then we'll see. I agree, he nodded. Emily must have been able to play up her father's enthusiasm for her new acquaintance. At least Damien thanked Alex and told him he was doing a good job. He nodded curtly and asked about the promised apartment. I've already taken care of that, Damien replied, satisfied. Here are the keys, the address. Thank you, Alex tucked everything into his pocket embarrassedly. He was very embarrassed to accept such gifts, and he would have done fine without them himself. Except that Matthew had been sick again lately, and it would be better for him to be warm and cozy. Damien stared intently at the boy's actions. That's odd, he stretched out, giving up the car. Clearly you were uncomfortable with it, and an apartment would seem to be a more expensive thing. Alex looked him straight in the eyes and realized it was better to tell the truth at once, so that there would be no unpleasant surprises later. I didn't do it for me, he admitted. My grandfather is sick. There's no reason for him to be out on the street. Damien didn't say anything back, just nodded his head. Alex took that gesture as approval of his action and hurried to leave. He couldn't wait to take Matthew to his new home. Only then he would have to tell him all the details of what had happened, and he wasn't sure that his grandfather would approve of the adventure he'd embarked on. And so it was. Matthew shook his head and said that the whole story wouldn't end well. Nevertheless, to Alex's great joy, he didn't refuse to move from the street to the apartment. Besides, having received from Damien a certain amount of money for current expenses, the guy managed to buy his ward some medicine, Alex went to Damien's house again. Now these visits became his daily duty. Moreover, he spent more time here than anywhere else. As much as he could, he and Emily pretended to be a couple in love. The boy kept a close eye on everything that was going on in the cottage, and quickly found out the reason for Damien's disagreement with his daughter. The situation turned out to be trivially simple. Emily's mother had died when she was still a baby. For a long time, her father raised her alone. But a few years ago, he finally managed to let a new woman into his heart. Emily, of course, was not happy about this development, but at first she treated her stepmother very tolerantly. After all, she was an adult and realized that Daddy could also be lonely and wanted a woman's warmth. He couldn't really spend the rest of his life mourning her unhappy mother. However, Angeli, so called this woman, as soon as she appeared, began to establish her own order in the house, and in every way to show that the mistress in the house can be only one. The 20-year-old Emily was clearly not suitable for this role. A grown-up girl, she said with obvious irritation, you could go to work instead of sitting on your neck. You could go to work too, instead of sitting on my father's neck, Emily replied in her tone. No, look at her, she's going to be sassing me. Angeli was indignant. I've got the whole house on my back. It hasn't fallen apart without you, Emily retorted. They were having more and more of these sorts of confrontations, and each time they did, they became more and more bitter. Damien tried not to interfere, hoping that the women would be able to work things out on their own. Both of them were dear to him, and he didn't want to ruin his relationship with either of them. Emily already resented this attitude. It seemed to her that if Dad wasn't sticking up for her, then he was really on Angie's side. That's why all her conflicts and her defiant behavior had started. But the man, as it often happened, was unable to think of such an obvious reason. Alex, even though he was watching the situation from the side, was clearly not in a hurry to give his employer advice. Firstly, it was, in fact, completely none of his business. Secondly, he doubted that he would listen to him. Well, all right, in that case, the family problems and without him somehow decide what they do with all this. However, several times his determination not to interfere in family affairs was seriously tested. The thing was, as he got to know Emily better, he began to realize that the girl wasn't really as bad as he had first thought her to be. Yes, indeed, she was the rather spoiled daughter of a successful businessman. Except that wasn't the whole truth about her. She clearly loved her father, cared about him, showed kindness, and was capable of noble deeds. After all, she seemed quite well read and at some point took it upon herself to correct the gaps in Alex's education. The boy himself did not notice how he began to feel a special sympathy for her. Anjali, on the contrary, did not cause him any warm feelings. Arrogant, rigid, greedy. She took the arrival of a guest in the house as if the girl she hated had brought another of her kind with her. The legend that he was the son of some of Damien's influential friends didn't convince her otherwise. It seemed to Alex that she tolerated Damien himself in the house only because there was nothing she could do about his presence. No love or affection, or at least just the usual respect he'd seen from her. Emily obviously felt the same way, and therein lay the true reason for her dislike of her stepmother. Several times Alex witnessed very unpleasant family scandals, but in most cases he managed to avoid participation in the squabbles. However, one of the days it happened that the guy could not stay aside. During a late breakfast, Damien went to the kitchen. Either his wife forgot to bring him a spoon or something else. He returned somewhat dazed, holding something that looked little like a cutlery in his hand. "I found this in the trash," he informed the audience, showing off the mysterious find. For a few seconds, Alex couldn't figure out what he was looking at, but then he realized it was a pregnancy test, and 2 stripes were clearly visible on its surface. So it was positive. He glanced at Emily, but she only looked dumbfounded. She shook her head. Her father's attention turned to her as well. "How do you explain that?" he asked. "I'm surprised," the daughter replied. "It's not mine." "Well, it is," the stepmother caustically inserted. "It was some stranger who broke into our house to do a test here, throw it in the trash, and then quietly go about her business." Actually, Emily blurted out, "I'm not the only woman in this house." How hard it is to believe that sometimes, but there was no point in me hiding the pregnancy. Unless, of course, it happened, Anjali parried. "Emily," Damien repeated, raising his voice slightly. "Stop breaking the comedy. Who's the baby by?" He glanced suspiciously at Alex. He wasn't sure how to respond, but at least he was sure he had nothing to do with anyone else's pregnancy. "Once again, for those of you who are particularly gifted, it's not my test, and I'm not pregnant." Emily cut him off. Damien and Alex began cautiously. "I think Emily is telling the truth." "I'm the boss at home," Damien shouted openly. "I'm not paying you to think something, and I'm certainly not paying for my daughter to have children by who knows who. Not by you?" "You know what?" Alex couldn't stand it. "I wasn't hired to listen to such insulting suspicions either. You'd better pay attention to your wife. She's only thinking about how to throw Emily out of here, and then you with everything you've got." With these words, he quickly got up from the table and then ran out of the house. Alex himself didn't know how long he wandered the streets, trying to calm down. He understood his behavior was stupid and simply unforgivable. He was not only responsible for himself. What would happen to the apartment where Matthew lived now? He was about to go back to Damien's house to apologize for his breakdown, to find out what the situation was like there, to see if they'd sorted out the unfortunate test after all. But at that very moment, the phone rang in his jacket pocket. He picked it up and heard Emily's concerned voice. "The latest news is, don't come into our house just yet. You can't come in here. Don't worry about your grandfather. No one's going to kick him out on the street." "Is your father really mad at me?" Upset, Emily said. "You tell him I'm sorry." "I really shouldn't have." "He's not mad," Emily interjected. "He's not mad," Emily interrupted him. "He's in the hospital. He had a stroke. He's stressed out. All they said at home was that they wouldn't let you see your father. I didn't even think to go." "That's terrible. Is there anything I can do to help?" "I don't know. Just keep your head down for now. I'll call you again." "Okay," Alex answered and hung up. He was completely confused, not knowing what to do. He wanted to go to Damien's hospital, but decided that wasn't a good idea. In the end, he just went home, buying some groceries for him and Matthew on the way. He wasn't used to spending money, so he still had some left over from the advance. The next few days passed in anxious anticipation for Alex. Emily didn't call again. Must not have had any news for him. At times it began to feel like all the recent events were just an obsession. A strange dream, bad in places and good in places. Giving up the habit of wandering the streets was harder than Alex thought when he was in the apartment. The walls felt like they were pressing on him all the time, and he wanted fresh air, so he often went for walks, spending a lot of time out of the house. If it wasn't for Matthew, he would hardly go back there at all. And on one of these walks, a couple sitting at the table of a street cafe caught his attention. They were discussing something heatedly, interspersing their talks with kisses, which were on the edge of decency. Alex didn't even immediately realize why exactly they interested him. He was about to pass by, but then the woman turned to him so that he could see her face properly. It was Anjali. That's when Alex realized that he knew the man too. He'd seen a glimpse of him when he'd driven away from the unfortunate burned house, but it was unlikely he'd ever be able to forget. It was all becoming clear. This was the same friend and companion of Damien's that had tried to burn him alive. Without a second thought, the guy pulled out his cell phone and dialed Emily's number. "I have news for you, and I'm afraid it's not very pleasant, but expect it," he said. "Oddly enough, I have some for you too," the girl retorted, "but let you go first." He told her of the scene he had observed just 5 minutes ago. "Wow," Emily exclaimed. "You wouldn't believe it. Anyway, I've been thinking about how to make Daddy feel better, and I decided I should bring him a note from the clinic that I'm not pregnant so he'd at least stop worrying about it. Anyway, the doctor informed me that it turns out my stepmother is expecting the baby." "The doctor said so?" Alex was surprised. "Well, yeah, he knows we're kind of the same family. So he told me I was going to have a little sister or brother. I didn't tell my dad so as not to worry him too much, and it turned out to be a good thing." "Yeah," Alex stretched out. "The baby's not his." Both of them thought the same thing, but neither of them voiced it. Now both Angie and Adrian had even more reasons to get Damien out of the way as soon as possible, and now that he was already in a bad way, it would be quite easy to do so. "We should meet," finally Emily said, "not a phone call." After a little thought, Alex suggested a cafe near his apartment as the place. He thought it would be safer that way. Less chance of Anjali seeing them and starting to guess something. So they did. When they met, Emily told him more details, seemingly innocent but alarming. To put them into perspective, her stepmother had slowly taken over Damien's business. Emily even suspected she was messing with the paperwork, so that if her father died, Anjali would inherit everything. It would be a good start to get proof of her connection to Adrian. Alex stretched out thoughtfully after listening to the story. "Well, I suppose that can be arranged," the girl smirked. "How's that? I started calling you like a fool when I saw them. You could have made a video." "It's no big deal," Emily brushed it off. "I'll talk to her and record the conversation secretly, saying I saw her with her lover." "Yeah, that's how she confessed to you. You've seen her. She's scandalous. She's bound to talk. You can nail her there. What about her kid? It's actually proof she's cheating. At least it'll make her nervous and probably do something stupid." Alex strongly disliked the idea. He realized that they were dealing with very dangerous people, capable of brutal murder to achieve their goals. But he also realized that there was no way he could talk Emily out of it. He could see her eyes burning. This was far more personal and painful for her than it was for him. "Okay," he said, "but please be careful, and be sure to call me and let me know how it went." Emily left, and all Alex could do was wait for her call. An hour passed. Another, a third. The girl never showed up. He tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that she was going to have a hard and probably long conversation, but the night was already beginning, and his phone was still silent. Alex even wanted to go to her house, but he was afraid that he might ruin everything. He called Emily several times, but she didn't pick up the phone. In the end, the guy decided that the morning would be more obvious. If she didn't show up the next day, then he would have to take action. Alex went to bed. True, he managed to fall asleep only in the morning. He tossed and turned in bed for a long time, haunted by the most horrible thoughts about what could have happened to Emily in the end. He was determined that the next time he saw her, he wouldn't let her go anywhere. Only now he realized how much he really cared about this girl. A few hours later, Alex was awakened by a persistent knock on the door. As he climbed out of bed, he tried to sleepily figure out what was going on. Matthew had already let the uninvited guests in. They were two drenched policemen. Just by looking at their faces, the boy realized that something terrible had happened. "You're under arrest on suspicion of Emily's murder," one of them informed the dazed Alex. "What do you mean?" "In the murder. She's dead," Alex asked, confused. "You better let us know where she is. If not, where can we find her body? Believe me, cooperating with the investigation will count for something," the policeman continued. "I last saw her yesterday," Alex tried to explain. "She went home, going to talk to her stepmother." "So you don't deny the fact of your meeting?" "I don't deny it." But I absolutely did not kill her. God, how can you even be sure she's dead when you haven't even found her body? How do you know a body hasn't been found? One of the policemen asked Riley. You told me so yourself, Alex muttered, stunned. No. I merely informed you that it was in your best interest to cooperate with law enforcement. No matter how hard Alex tried to explain to the police officers what had really happened, it was all in vain. No one believed his version of Angeli's involvement in the girl's disappearance. After all, she had reported to the police that her stepdaughter had not returned home in the evening. And what a coincidence, right after meeting him. She must have told them a lot of other things. No one told Alex, of course, but they looked at him like a criminal, and he was well aware that the situation was hopeless. All he had was his word against Angeli's. Realizing all this, Alex finally collapsed and without objection allowed himself to be taken to the holding cell. Emily is missing. Damien is in the hospital after suffering a heart attack. There was no one to stand up for him and get out of this situation on his own. The kid didn't stand a chance. Matthew understood his situation. However, unlike Alex, he was still free and could do something. He didn't think for long. He saw Damien's intervention as the only salvation for everyone. As much as not to disturb a sick man, there was nowhere to go. He went straight to the hospital. It took him a long time to explain to the doctors of the prestigious clinic that his case to an important patient could not be delayed. Naturally, no one wanted to let him into the room, until finally Damien Weller himself intervened, who was fed up with the persistent visitor. Matthew Viktorovich, he muttered in surprise when he saw the entrant. Is it really you? It's been a long time since anyone has called me, that the visitor retorted. You must have taught at my place. How so? 5th through 9th grade. Damien, remember? I do, of course. How could I not recognize you? You've come a long way. I'm the opposite, you see. I've given up. My own kids kicked me out of the house, but that's not why I came to see you. There'll be time to share the news. Alex is in trouble. Are you Alex's grandfather? Yes, I am his grandfather. Even though he calls me that, but then again, that doesn't matter. You listen to me, Damien. I'm just warning you. You're going to have to worry in the course of my story. I didn't want to disturb a man in this state, but there's no other way, and Matthew told his former student the whole story that he knew from Alex's words. How Adrian had contacted Angeli, and how they had plotted to kill Damien, how Alex and Emily had tried to stop them, how the girl had ended up missing and the guy had been taken to the station on suspicion of her murder. We'll figure it out, Damien replied succinctly. There was no telling how he felt at that moment. Did he believe it? How disturbed was he by his grandfather's story? Matthew watched his face anxiously, but he couldn't tell what effect the story had had. The only thing that was clear to him was that the patient clearly wanted to be alone. Hastily saying goodbye, he left the room. It took the businessman some time to comprehend what he had heard, and then he began to act. The first thing he did was to call a private detective he knew, sending him to follow Angeli. He was sure that if she really had a connection to Adrian, it would come out pretty quickly. After all, now they both must think they had nothing more to fear. In a surprising way, what had happened had worked like medicine on Damien. It seemed like it should be the opposite. But the thought that he was the only one who could figure it all out gave him strength. After a week, the attending physician stated that he could go home. At the same time, the first results of the surveillance appeared. The detective discovered even more than Damien had expected. He managed not only to discover the connection between Angeli and Adrian, but also to record the conversation between the lovers, who, without shyness, discussed their future plans. The conspirators were arrested, and the same day the police had to release Alex with apologies. And soon Angeli began to testify, trying to blame all the blame on her lover. Among other things, she confessed that fateful night Adrian lured Emily to some cliff above the river allegedly to talk and pushed from there. For all the atrocities committed and planned, the couple was now facing severe punishment. But Damien was not happy about it. He had lost his daughter, his friend, and his wife all at once. His teacher was the only thing keeping him alive, regularly coming to visit and distracting himself from his grief with long conversations about the past. Alex could not accept the idea that Emily was gone. He didn't show up at his apartment or Damien's house. Days and nights, almost without sleep, he searched for the missing girl in the vicinity of the place where the crime was committed. He believed that one day he would find her. One day Alex stumbled upon some hut on the bank of the river, completely abandoned by the look of it, except that there was smoke coming from the stovepipe. Not hoping for anything, he knocked on the door. Maybe the inhabitants of this place had seen something? No one opened the door for a long time. No wonder, for it was unlikely that those who had settled in the middle of nowhere would welcome visitors. But finally the door opened. Alex couldn't believe his eyes. On the threshold stood a guy, apparently about his age. He had the distinct feeling that he was looking in a mirror. The same facial features, the same sharp cheekbones, the same square chin, the same cut and color of his eyes. It's like a long-lost twin brother. It can't be! Together they exclaimed. The stranger's voice, too, was very similar to Alex's own. The boy was still unable to recover from the new shock that had descended upon him. He was looking for some explanation of what was happening, but he couldn't find it, and as if that were not enough, from somewhere in the depths of the hut, a girl came out limping, leaning against the walls. Her face was disfigured with terrible wounds. However, Alex could not recognize her. Without any doubt, it was Emily. She was not very healthy, but she was definitely alive. She splashed her hands and threw herself into the guy's arms. At that moment, he seemed to lose his senses for a while. At least Alex clearly remembered how he stood in the doorway, looking at his reflection, how Emily appeared and shrieked, rushing to him. And the next memory, he was already lying on something hard, on a bench, as it turned out. The landlord and his guest were bent over him, apparently trying to bring him to his senses. "Don't get up," the lad warned him, "or you may faint again." "Yeah, I think I can do that without getting up," Alex retorted in a hoarse voice, jokingly. "That's good." The stranger turned to Emily. "So he'll live." What's going on here anyway?" "Well, where to start?" The landlord pretended to wonder. "Well, let's put it this way. My name is Nicholas, and by the looks of it, you're my twin brother. Believe me, when Emily mistook me for you, I was just as surprised, but I've had time to get used to it. Besides, I knew you existed before. You've had a rough time of it too, I see, but actually better than me. I was adopted when I was a baby. I had a good family that gave me a great education and gave me a pretty solid start in this life. I even had a business. Only it's all in the past. Apparently I wasn't very careful with my business, found some irregularities, and went to jail." "And what? Released in the end?" Alex asked warily. If only Nicholas brushed it off. "I ran away. My mother is sick, not the one who raised me, our own. That's who I was trying to get to, but I couldn't get in. But I saved a pretty girl, so I'm of some use." "Emily," Alex exclaimed, because she was the one he'd been looking for all this time. And now, from the shock he had experienced, he had completely forgotten that he had found her. She leaned over him and kissed him affectionately on the forehead. He caught her hand, pressed it against his. "What happened?" he asked. "You were right. Until I noticed she didn't bother me talking to this woman, much less. Anyway, at first everything went exactly according to our plan. My plan," she confessed. "I made the tape secretly. She didn't suspect a thing, of course, but I guess at that point she thought I was a danger to her. She woke me up in the middle of the night and told me that she and Adrian wanted to talk to me. Since you know everything, maybe we can work something out sometime," she suggested. I agreed. I thought maybe I could get more evidence, maybe not just of their love affair, but of more serious crimes. I got in the car with her and we drove to this river, but upstream. There are some very steep banks there. Adrian wasn't there, by the way. She said he must be late. She suggested we walk along the bank together for a while, but she also pushed me off the cliff. It must have been the most joyous moment of her life. She hated me so much. I hit very hard, you see, and even had some internal injuries, but somehow I managed to survive. It was very painful. But I knew I couldn't scream. If they realized that I was alive, Adrian would come after all. They looked into the water for a long time, apparently searching for me, but I managed to hide behind some ledge. I found her in the morning," Nicholas added. "She was lying unconscious on the shore. I found her to fish." "Well, thank you," Brother Alex told him sincerely. "I don't know what I'd do if you were really dead." Emily blushed and averted her eyes in embarrassment. Nicholas, on the other hand, grinned in surprise. "Do you know, little brother? You can't get far on one thank you. I think Damien will find something to thank you with." "No, Damien won't help in this case," Nicholas shook his head. "What are you going to do? Go to my mother's instead. Just don't mention the prison or the cabin. Let her think I'm doing fine. Tell her business won't let me come for a while." "Okay," Alex agreed. Then he called Damien and delighted him with the news that his daughter had been found alive and almost healthy. The businessman sent an air ambulance helicopter to pick up the entire company. Emily was immediately sent to the hospital. But Nicholas, convinced that the mother is in good hands, went straight to the police to surrender. Alex fulfilled his promise and a couple of days later went to his mother, whom he had never known. He kept wondering, how would this meeting go for him? How would he feel? Would she be happy that there was a second son? Preoccupied with such thoughts, the guy stood in front of the cherished door for a long time, still hesitating to press the bell. There was no telling how it would end. Maybe he would leave to fulfill his promise some other time. He wasn't quite sure he was ready for this meeting. But then the door opened on its own. On the threshold, he saw a woman. She could hardly be called elderly, but a hard life had taken its toll on her appearance. "Nicholas," she exclaimed, "he's here, son. I wish you'd given me a little warning. And I haven't even got anything for tea. I was just going to the store." "Sorry," I said quietly. "I'm not Nicholas. I'm Alex." "Alex," she took a step back, tears welling up in her eyes. The mother stared intently at her second son's facial features, as if trying to find a difference from Nicholas. Finally, waking up, she led him into the apartment and invited him into the kitchen. There was an awkward silence. After a few minutes, Alex still dared to speak. "Nicholas and I met by chance. He told me to tell you that he's very busy, but he'll definitely visit you as soon as he can." His mother was silent. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She could not bring herself to raise her head and look at her son. A few more minutes passed before she, still keeping her eyes on the floor, finally spoke. "I was young, stupid. When you were born, I wanted some kind of independence from my parents. I got pregnant. I didn't know how to tell my father. He was strict. So I ran away and wandered around. Your daddy didn't want you or me. He sent me away, wouldn't even let me in, said I couldn't prove I had his children, that no one would believe that he could be with someone like me. Where to go, what to do. I didn't know. I was almost a child myself. But I couldn't have another one on top of that, and then it was just a scare. You had two. I didn't know what to do with one. I panicked. I left you at the hospital. I'm sorry, son, even though I don't know. You would have been better off with me." Isabel finally looked up and glanced apprehensively at Alex, but he looked at her and felt unbearable pity for the woman, mixed with tenderness. Could he condemn what she had done? Did he have that right? He got up from the chair where he was sitting. He went to his mother and hugged her tightly. She responded to his embrace and burst into tears. So they sat in silence, interrupted only by occasional sobs. Isabel was the first to speak. "Nicholas found me. He told me he was adopted by rich people, and everything worked out well for him. Retired businessman. You probably know that yourself, but I didn't need two kids. So you're out of luck. You could have had either one of the two. You were just babies back then. Tell me, how did your life turn out?" Alex vividly remembered life in the orphanage. Cruel jokes of his peers, overly strict teachers, strict and rather meaningless daily routine. He remembered how excited he was about graduation day and the fact that he would finally have a place of his own. Yes, a small house somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but it would be his alone. He didn't live in that little house for more than a week. Wooden houses are great, except they burn too well. You mess with the stove, and that's it. Welcome to the streets, to a new homeless life. It's your own fault if you didn't take care of the housing you were given. That's all you get. Then he met Matthew. Grandpa was, of course, strange and infirm, clearly in need of care and support. But with his appearance, Alex felt for the first time in his life that he was not alone. And further on, such events began that he could not have imagined, and for all their unusualness, they helped him to find the girl he loved, and now also his brother and mother. "I stayed in the orphanage," Alex answered, "but now I'm doing well too, and I don't blame you for anything. Mom, I'll visit you, just like Nicholas did." They talked about everything for a long time, until finally Alex was going home. He would have stayed longer, but there were things to do in his hometown. He had to visit Emily in the hospital. He had to keep an eye on Matthew, and Damien was asking for some help. Besides, the guy was determined to get to the bottom of his brother's case and get him out of jail if possible. What am I guessing? Guess is not the right word. It's Adrian again. Probably started out with lesser crimes, and then he got a little cocky with his own impunity. It was another 6 months before Alex and Emily finally decided to get married. Of course, their wedding was attended by everyone close to them. Nicholas and his mother, Damien and Matthew. All of them were sincerely happy for the young. But most of all, of course, the newlyweds themselves were happy. Entering a new happy life. Alex did not forget his ward. The apartment where they had been living for the last time was bought by him and completely given to Matthew. And he, feeling the taste of normal life again, thought about returning to his favorite job. Despite his advanced age and some health problems, he remained quite alert and his brain was working as well as ever. Specialists with his knowledge, experience, and love for children are sorely lacking in today's schools. So Matthew quickly became a history and social studies teacher again. That would have been the end of it. But on the same day that Emily and Alex's wedding took place, Carline, while in the colony, gave birth to a child, a boy, completely healthy. Except his mother didn't need him at all. and she immediately gave him up. This was reported to Damien, who was still considered the likely father of the child, since he was conceived but still married. The latter, without thinking long, made the decision to adopt him and planned to raise the boy as his own son, regardless of who was actually his biological father. It's not the child's fault in any way, he explained to his surprised daughter. But imagine what kind of life would be waiting for him, and even with such a mother. Even though she gave him up, he'd still be stigmatized for life. That's true, Alex confirmed, no stranger to such things. And then a couple months later, Damien learned that he would soon be a happy grandfather. Emily laughingly told him that now she was really pregnant and could even tell her father who it was from without shame. Damien, of course, was only too happy to hear such news. Healthy, young, energetic people sometimes don't believe in the existence of disease. I mean, they know that someone gets sick and even dies. But it's mostly old people who've already lived their lives. Well, or those who were born sick, or those who ruin their own health. And young and healthy people just don't have time to be sick. That's what Marcus always thought. A young but already successful businessman, a happy husband and father, full of energy. The man, who was barely over 30, felt sick. At first he didn't pay attention to it. It's nothing, a slight cold. Besides, he's overworked. You need to rest, sleep, and everything will pass. It's not like going to a doctor. He hadn't been to a polyclinic for ages. He didn't know how the doors opened. However, time passed, and it did not get better. On the contrary, some strange pains were added to his weakness. In the evening, he told his wife about it. He did not complain, but simply said that he felt somehow not very well, hoping for sympathy and maybe for some advice. But Camila was also young, healthy, and didn't believe anything could happen to them, especially men. Come on, it'll pass. What kind of sissies are you men? It's us women who have to put up with it all our lives. What's it to you? But no, just a pimple on your nose, you die right away. These words offended me, but also calmed me down. Really, why should he? Let's say he goes to the doctor, and what will he say? He didn't even realize what ails him, and there's no time to go to the doctor. He was doing business, sitting in the accounting department with an elderly, strict woman discussing financial matters, and she noticed something. You don't look so good lately, Mr. Marcus. How are you feeling? And he, as if pleased by the sympathy in the voice of a woman who was essentially a stranger, took it upon himself to tell her everything that was troubling him. The woman frowned. And you go to work. I have to go to the doctor. Not go, run. You can't treat your health like that. It's no business, Mrs. Megan said. How do you leave things alone? He objected. All the more reason to get treatment if you're worried about your case. Take some tests. Have you examined there? It may not be much of a problem. You'll take vitamins and have some injections, and then you'll be back on track. But if you let it go, and you don't get better, then you won't have much to do. Oh man, you always procrastinate until the last minute, and then we have to deal with you. That's just the way it is. Both my wife and my co-worker complain about men, but in different ways. One chases him to the doctor, the other, on the contrary, reproaches that he is fooling around and pays too much attention to his health. And somehow it stings that his wife won't bother with him. She doesn't want to hear about his ailments even now. She doesn't even want to sleep with him. She sent him to another room. I'm fed up. You sweat a lot at night. It's disgusting. You make me wake up all wet myself. So I guess Mrs. Megan's right, we should go. Maybe it's nothing. Soon it got really bad. He went to the doctor. He realized he had more than a simple problem, and the doctor realized it too, though he didn't say exactly what it was. Don't be frightened. I'm not saying that it is something terrible. It's just that you have to have a checkup to rule out all the risks. Without looking at Marcus, she wrote out a referral to the oncology center. On the way home, he thought about whether to tell his wife. She'd be scared. She'd probably cry. But how could he not tell her? He had to. Camila did not think to be frightened. She was rather angry. Here we go. Now they will drag you to hospitals, you'll see. I went to the doctor. I told you it wouldn't do any good. But what can I do when I'm so weak? And believe me, it's really bad, Marcus excused himself. Oh, come on, it's bad. You should know how people used to live. They knew only two medicines, vodka with pepper or vodka with salt, and they lived to be 100 years old, without ever seeing a doctor. And now you're running around to doctors. They, clever doctors, sense that a man with money will now pull from you without end. For every sneeze, expensive drugs prescribe until they will not rip off completely. And when you are left without everything, will send to die with peace of mind, she said. Why are you like this? They haven't taken a penny so far. Everything is covered by the policy, Marcus reassured her. So they haven't started treatment. The best part is yet to come. Now our money's going to fly. That's the only way. And the policy, haven't you heard? Free treatment. It used to be like that, and now it's no longer. No one will give you an enema without money. But it's not just about money. It's about my life. Or do you really think I want you dead? It's all I want to see you cured. I just don't believe these doctors, she replied. But anyway, the treatment was started, and Camila was right. The money was spent very quickly. This is even before the final diagnosis is made. And finding out what was wrong with him needed to be done as soon as possible in order to start treatment. As a result, the doctor seemed to reassure, but at the same time added worries. You don't have cancer, thank God, but a disease that equates to it. The worst part is that you delayed treatment. The tumor could reborn at any moment, and then things would be much sadder. And Marcus began to live around clinics, hospitals, medical offices. When they put him in the clinic, it was even easier. At home, Camila, who seemed to have already resigned herself to the upcoming expenses and to the fact that her husband had started treatment, was very displeased. You see that all the problems started after you went to the doctor. It was not so bad for you before that, and now you are traveling from clinic to clinic. They cut you there, inject you here, just give you money. And who's going to work, uncle? You know you can't let go of this business for a minute. At least write me a power of attorney. I'll slowly get into it, make sure they don't steal everything. By the way, did you find out if it's contagious? At least me and my son, so that you don't reward us. It was hard to hear that. It seemed that his wife was the closest person to him, but he has nobody but her and his son. His parents are long dead, no sisters, no brothers. And she, Camila, never once asked him how he was feeling. She never went to see a doctor. And not only that, she's trying to keep her son away from him. Jasper's 7 years old. He's used to his daddy being with him all the time, but Camila's like, stay out of it. Dad's sick. Stay out of it. One day, Marcus even heard her tell Jasper to wean off Dad. I'm still alive, aren't I? Camila, why are you burying me alive? Unable to stand it, he once said. Who's burying you? Live 100 years, outlive us. If things go on like this, there'll be nothing to bury you with anyway. When you get well, we'll be begging. How do you like that prospect? Was all his wife said. And Marcus was surprised at how cruel his wife had become. He didn't want to talk to her. We didn't even want to see her. The hospital was better. People there, even if it was for duty or money, still expressed interest in his recovery. They're interested in his condition, cheer him up, give him hope. But his wife behaves as if he is already dead and is present only by mistake, although she herself is always away from home. Business is quite seriously engaged, and the child considered abandoned. It's good that Jasper is a quiet boy, from school to home. At home he sits with a book, or at the TV. Did you eat anything today, son? Dad asked, calling from the hospital. Of course I did, Dad. We have everything. And I take everything I want from the fridge myself. I eat sausage, cheese, cucumbers. How are you, Dad? Not recovered yet. And when will you come? I'm bored without you. Oh, Jasper. Jasper's the only person I know. What if your daddy never gets well, never comes back? Mom thinks a kid can eat sausage and he doesn't need anything else. I'd like to get well, come home alive and well. To go with her son on a hike, to a museum, just to walk down the street holding his hand. Will it ever come true? The doctors were reassuring, but there's been no improvement. More like the opposite. Maybe Camila's right. This treatment is useless. It's all just a waste of money. When Marcus was discharged from the hospital, the doctor said, "Well, we've done all we can. The tumor growth has stopped. Now you need to take a break from the treatment and the hospital environment and think. Surgery is necessary, but it's a fee-only operation. Try to raise the money, consult with your family." And the doctor named the amount of the operation, which made even Marcus, who was not a poor man, feel a little embarrassed. He didn't have that kind of money. It was possible to raise it, of course, but it was almost all he had. And the main thing is that it didn't depend on him alone. He has a wife, a son, who also need this money and will have to spend it on the operation. And it is not excluded, by the way, that it may end unsuccessfully, or simply not bring the desired result. Does he have the right to take that risk? "If I refuse the operation," he asked the doctor, "then recovery will be in doubt. I'm not saying you'll necessarily die, but your quality of life will deteriorate markedly." The doctor was still saying something, and in Marcus's ears was the voice of Camila, who was already prepared for the fact that he would be gone, and not even particularly worried about it at home. When he told his wife about the surgery, it turned out that Camila wasn't worried about her husband, but about the money. When she heard about the cost of the surgery, which could possibly save her husband's life, she splashed her hands. "Marcus, are you crazy? It's an absolutely unbelievable amount of money. But it can still be raised," he said without much confidence. "It can. And you know, darling, I haven't been idle since you got sick. I've studied the whole internet, learnt all about your illness and those who have had the same or similar diagnosis. And you know what happens to people. Exactly the same thing that's happening to you. Doctors pull money for treatment medication and then tell them they need expensive surgery. People give their last, they sell flats, cars, everything they have, ask kind acquaintances and relatives. And still they get the necessary amount of money. They undergo surgery. And then the relatives write, 'Thank you all. The collection is closed. The operation did not help. The man died.' So you think I should just die without surgery?" Marcus asked. He didn't know how right his wife was, but her words seemed reasonable. "So you listen all the way through. There's this woman, she has a similar diagnosis. She had treatment at first, too, trying to get money, and then she gave up. There is no money, the treatment is exhausting, and it is better to die peacefully than to suffer like this and make her family suffer. Well, she's still alive. Yeah, she's had her problems. You can't say she's healthy, but she's alive, she's working, she's raising her kids, she's been living peacefully for a few years now. So if you're going to die, it'll probably be from the operation. But you'll leave me and my son destitute, and if you don't waste any more money, you'll still live. But yeah, you're right. I guess I don't really want to go under the knife myself, especially since it's really money, and there's no guarantee." You see, Camilla visibly cheered up. "And the guarantee? Yes, that's ridiculous. They'll give you any kind. They all promise because they know you won't make a claim anyway. If anything. And even if I tried, I wouldn't be able to. Doctors don't give away their own. It's like the mafia. So lie down, rest at your leisure. Would you like me to tell you how things are going at the firm?" "No need, I'll tell you later." Marcus lay down and turned his back to the wall. He was no longer interested in the company's affairs. Everything had fallen to the second, fifth, 10th plan. Nothing that pertained to life was relevant to him anymore. Camila seems to be doing business wisely. That's fine. But what about him? Might he survive, like some unknown woman? Or maybe he'll die. That's fine. Everyone dies. No one gets out of here alive. Camila, leaving her husband to rest, was ready to rejoice. She had talked her husband out of the operation, and even without much effort. She had a clever way of thinking of people with similar illnesses. He didn't even think to ask me to show him the information. Well, there was something similar, though not exactly the same, but that doesn't matter. Surely there must be people like that. Both those who died and those who survived. Who knows why they survived? It's a matter of who's fated. If it's meant to be, Marcus will survive. She didn't really want the man she'd once loved to die. Well, maybe not much, but she'd been with him for almost 10 years. Life is changing now, but it's for the best. The main thing now is to keep Marcus as long as possible, at least not very ill. I don't want to have to look after him. Or else what's a man to suffer for nothing? "Mom, has Dad recovered yet?" quietly asked the son who had entered unnoticed. "Oh, why are you sneaking around? You scared me." "Yes, recovered almost. Don't you see he is resting now? And go do your own thing, play something. I have things to do, I'm running away now. I'll come back tonight." Jasper was used to this attitude and just as quietly left the room. He loved his dad, realized that he was still a long way from full recovery. And the fact that Mom was happy wasn't because of Dad at all. She had always been in a good mood when he was in hospital before. Marcus stayed at home to recover, according to his wife, or to get sicker. It was up to him. Camilla was rarely at home. She took little interest in her husband's health. Only in the evening she would come in and ask, "How are you?" But she didn't listen to any answers. He spent his days with his son, cooked soups and porridge for him. I talked, read books, watched TV together. His strength was less and less every day, but he, who had refused the operation, did not think about any treatment. He took his medication more like a machine. One day Camilla, looking critically at her husband, was surprised. "Do you even go out? You can't stay at home without leaving the house. It will make you even more unstable." "I can't walk anymore. I can hardly walk to the kitchen." "You're not strong enough. That's why you're sitting at home. Physical activity means a lot too. Come on, start walking. Although you won't have anything to walk in now. How did you shred though? Your skin and bones, you could lose any trousers. You know, we should put you in something decent. They're waiting for you at work too, always asking for you. I'm sure you'll be there soon. We need to order a suit to fit, so you don't walk around like a ragamuffin," Camilla said businesslike. "Do what you want," Marcus replied, who didn't have the energy to argue or just talk to his wife. It was rather odd, of course, that she thought as if her husband would ever return to work in life. And Camilla hadn't thought of making her husband a suit at all. She decided for the funeral, judging by the look of him, it should be soon. Marcus had been a rather sturdy, dense man in the past. Now there was literally half of him left. Of course, for a funeral it doesn't matter, but in one that's big, what difference does it make? Still, the man is not the last man. Surely former colleagues, friends will come to the funeral. They'll see him. They'll say she didn't take care of him, and she still has to work with these people. And she depends on a lot of them. So it will have to, do not want to want, and think about how to dress her husband decently to see him off to his last journey. You can't take him to a shop, of course, nor to an atelier. But if you can't bring the client to the master, you'll have to bring the master to the client. So Camilla decided and went to the atelier alone. There she went to one of the dressmakers who had been recommended to her as a good master of men's suits. This woman, who was about the same age as Camilla, introduced herself as Jennifer. "I need to make a nice men's suit for my husband," Camilla said immediately. "That's fine, but in order to do that, you have to bring him in to be measured." "That's the problem. Bringing him over I can't. He's seriously ill and hardly ever leaves the house. So I'm going to ask you to come to our house and get measured there." "We don't actually do that," Jennifer shrugged. "I understand, but for someone who's sick, it's not like I have to carry him here on a stretcher. We don't live that far from here, and besides, I'll pay for the extra trouble. I'll pay very handsomely." That promise was a decisive one for Jennifer. She was in constant need of money, raising her daughter alone, constantly looking for some kind of part-time work, as orders had been scarce lately. And the invitation of this beautiful and well-groomed client came in handy. Yes, and felt sorry for her, so young, beautiful, and her husband, apparently, and really seriously ill. However, it is not clear why he needs a suit. But the dressmaker decided that it was none of her business, wrote down the address, and promised to come in the evening. She was met at the posh flat by the landlady, who was indeed grateful that Jennifer had agreed to come. "You don't worry, There will be no complaints about the quality. My husband is really seriously ill, so I'm afraid he won't be going anywhere in this suit. And he won't complain if something inside is wrong. The main thing is to make it look good on the outside. Jennifer felt uneasy. She realized that the suit was probably being ordered for a funeral. Well, such orders had happened before, except she'd never had to take the measurements of a dying person before. "Come on, I'll introduce you to my husband," Camila said affably. As she entered the room, she exclaimed cheerfully, "There's Jennifer. She's going to make you a new suit that you won't be ashamed to wear out in public." Marcus stepped up to meet his guest, and both of them met their gazes and were stunned. Yes, they had known each other before, in their early youth, and not just known each other. They had a love affair. Marcus and Jennifer were getting married. Jennifer had just started college and Marcus was graduating. They met and were together for almost a year, never parting for a day. And at that moment, when the question of the wedding was almost decided, there was a catastrophic quarrel. The reason was, of course, jealousy. Marcus saw his beloved talking on the street with another guy, made a scene. But then, for the first time, Jennifer was able to justify herself. "Yes, it's just a fellow student. We were walking from class together. What's the big deal? We were talking about classes, about professors." To be honest, she hid from Marcus that this classmate was courting her, and even confessed his love. She refused him, confessing that she was already marrying someone else. However, the young man did not abandon his intentions, and soon Marcus saw them together again, and not just walking together. The guy hugged her and kissed her. That was enough. Marcus decided that Jennifer was cheating on him, spoke rudely, and said he didn't want to deal with a girl who let other men woo her so easily. "I don't know if you had something with him or not. It doesn't even matter. The important thing is that you easily let him have his way. I've seen that." "What on earth did you see?" "I didn't expect him to do that myself. We were just walking beside each other," she excused herself, crying. "Well, yeah, just walking next to each other. Then we just hugged and kissed and just woke up together. I'm sorry, Jennifer. If things like that don't matter to you and you have it easy, then I don't see what else we have to talk about." Jennifer hoped that she would still be able to convince her lover of her fidelity, but he didn't want to listen to her anymore. She took the documents from the institute and went home to her village, and there she realized she was pregnant. When her parents found out, they said, "We don't want such a daughter. You can go to the one you got pregnant with. We don't need such a disgrace. We let our daughter go to school. They'll laugh at us. Go wherever you want. But don't come here without your husband. We won't let you on the doorstep anyway." And Jennifer went back to town. Certainly not to the man she'd been fooling around with. She wasn't going to go back to Marcus and apologize to him again. But she'd left the institute, which meant she'd been evicted from her dormitory. She had to live somewhere. She went to college, where she learned to be a dressmaker. Found a job. Gave birth to a daughter. Got a place in the family hostel. She worked hard and as a result was able to save money for her own place. She bought a small flat in a not the best neighborhood. But it was still her own property, which she hoped could be exchanged for something better. She hadn't seen Marcus again since the fight, nor had she tried to find him, even to let him know he had a child. She was sure she would never see her daughter's father again. And here he was in front of her, miserable, haggard, obviously gravely ill, and married to a woman who was already so resigned to his near death that she had ordered a suit for the funeral. Of course, they didn't pretend to know each other. Jennifer began to take the measurements, wishing she could get out of this house as soon as possible. It pained her to see Marcus in such a state. Besides, she realized that he was probably going to die soon. There was nothing she could do to help except sew this most unfortunate suit, doing what was required of her. Jennifer said her goodbyes and left, barely holding back her tears. The only time she gave vent to her feelings was at home alone. After all, Marcus was her first and only love. He was also the father of her daughter Elizabeth, who looked so much like him. And Jennifer didn't even have any pictures left to show her daddy. Now he would most likely die, and they would never meet again. But how can this be? Crying bitterly, Jennifer thought. Why does his wife seem so carefree, even cheerful? After all, when a loved one is at death's door, there's no fun to be had. Isn't that so? She's having fun, rejoicing, giggling, ordering a suit for his funeral, instead of fighting for the person she loves. After all, they are clearly not poor people, and money can solve many problems nowadays. You can even go abroad if necessary. Then the daughter came back from school. She immediately noticed that her mother was crying. "Mom, what's wrong with you? Your eyes are like this. Did something happen at work? Or did someone hurt you?" Elizabeth was very attached to her mom, always taking care of her, trying not to upset her. And it was even hard for her to imagine that someone had hurt her mom, so kind and wonderful. "No, Elizabeth, it's okay. I cried because I learned that a friend's husband was ill, and very seriously. So I felt sorry for them," Jennifer explained. Elizabeth believed, and then they calmed down and began to discuss their business. As she put her daughter to bed, Jennifer thought again about Marcus and what they still had in common. Whether he died or survived didn't matter. "I probably shouldn't hide from Marcus that he has a daughter. He has a right to know that. After all, I'm not going to file for child support, claim an inheritance. I don't want anything. Just that he knows about his daughter, and that she knows who her father is," Jennifer pondered. "So we should meet, tell him the whole truth, and then let him decide what to do. I don't think his wife will be too upset, especially if she finds out that there's no threat to her well-being. The fact that her husband could die at any moment seems to be the least of her fears." That's what Jennifer thought, but she didn't know how she was going to talk to Marcus alone. However, that wasn't much of a problem either. A few days later, she called. "I'm sorry, Camila, but I guess I'll have to come again. I have already cut out the suit and started sewing, and I have a doubt whether the sleeves will be too short. I'm afraid a preliminary fitting and adjustment is necessary." "Yes, please do come. I won't be home though, but I'll warn both my husband and son, and they'll let you in, and you do what you need to do." Jennifer was more than satisfied with this, and she hurried off with the unfinished suit to Marcus. In the meantime, he too was plagued with doubts. Of course, he recognized Jennifer, and long-forgotten feelings awoke in his soul. How come they're not together? And whose fault was that? It appeared that he had hurt her himself. He didn't look for her after she left the institute and went somewhere unknown. The neighbors at the dormitory said that she was going home to her village. Apparently she did, because he never saw Jennifer again. But now, it turned out she was living in town, working as a dressmaker and sewing him a suit. Marcus guessed why Camilla had decided to order him a suit. She was probably not just resigning herself to his imminent death, but hastening it. And why wouldn't she? He had already realized that she had taken control of the firm, decided that she was the rightful owner, and not without reason. She would be the owner after his death. And judging by her mood, you can understand that she is not really afraid that her husband will die. It's quite possible that she even has a candidate to replace him. If I'd stayed with Jennifer, it wouldn't have been like this, Marcus thought. Surely she wouldn't have waited listlessly for me to die, especially not with the money. Why did I refuse the operation? After all, it's still quite possible to pay for it now. And all of Camila's assurances that she and Jasper would go their separate ways are hardly worth anything serious. There should be plenty of money left to live on. In fact, I could still change my mind and agree to the operation. But does it all matter now? Jennifer's making a suit, she's giving it to Camille. All I have to do is wait to die. And I can't even talk to her, Jennifer. It's a good time to make up for past mistakes. At least die with peace of mind. And just as he was thinking about it, his wife rang. "How do you miss me?" "The dressmaker is coming today with a suit to try on. Don't forget to open the door." "Okay, sure," Marcus replied, trying to contain his joy. Just now he'd been thinking about how he could talk to Jennifer, and here she was coming herself. Probably to try on a costume, probably wanted to talk too. He looked forward to her visit. And here she came. "Jennifer, darling, I was so sorry we didn't talk then. I have something to say to you. Come on in. We'll decide about the costume later." "What about the suit?" "There's nothing wrong with it. I wanted to talk to you too. I have something to say." "Marcus, tell me what's wrong with you. Why do you look like that? What are you sick with?" Jennifer had come of her own accord, but she didn't know where to start the conversation. She was really concerned about Marcus' condition. but there was nothing she could do to help anyway. They needed to talk about something else. He felt the same way, and so he brushed the question aside. "What's the matter with me? I am ill, as you see, and very seriously, what to speak of. I wanted to talk about something else. I must ask your forgiveness. I realize it was all my fault, and I didn't really think you were cheating on me." He didn't know how to talk about the main thing, about what was bothering him so much. "But something maybe I should apologize too. I got wound up then too and took offense and went away. Then I came back to town, but I didn't look for you." "Why would I?" "I was pregnant. Yes, that's why I couldn't stay in the village." "You mean you were supposed to have a baby and you didn't tell me?" Marcus was confused. "Yes, as it happened, it happened. Just had a baby girl, Elizabeth. She's 9 now. That's why I came today." "I reckon you should know about having her," Jennifer admitted. "Oh my God, I have a daughter as well. And I have a son. Jasper, he's 7. Turns out there's an older daughter as well," Marcus whispered in amazement. "Yeah, here I brought pictures of her. She looks just like you. By the way, I wanted to ask for a picture of you to show her too. Otherwise, she doesn't even know what her daddy looks like. I'd like you two to meet, but I don't know how to arrange it. After all, your wife would probably be against it." "You probably meant to say that we won't have time to get acquainted. As you can see, I'm not in the best of shape, and I may not be around anytime soon." "But that's where I started. Marcus, how can that be? After all, you're not a poor man. I can tell. You have such a swanky flat. And I understand you've got a good job. Can't the doctors do anything? They can cure a lot of diseases nowadays. They send them abroad, they get medicines after all. Well, I don't know anything about it, but I've read about it. People have to raise money. And do you have any?" "Yes, I do. And as the doctors say, you don't even have to go anywhere special. They can do the operation at our clinic. But it costs a lot, of course, and I can generally pay for it. My wife is against it. She's afraid that the operation won't help anyway, and she and her son will go to the world," Marcus confessed. "What on earth is that? How can a wife say that? What is she afraid of? What could be scarier than the death of the dearest person? And why do you put up with it? Are you not capable? Can't you agree to this operation yourself? Your life depends on it. You should be the first to fight for yourself and not listen to anyone. I mean, I don't know what's going on. Maybe your wife does have reason to be afraid. But do you really think you can just die like that? You have a little boy. Don't you want to live for him? Don't you think he needs you?" Jennifer said eagerly. "I guess you're right," Marcus muttered. "I think about it sometimes, but I guess I've been too little preoccupied with my condition, namely about my son. Well, of course he needs me. I can see for myself what he'll be without me. Camilla. She's not a bad woman, as you might think, just selfish. Apparently she thinks only of herself, without noticing anyone else around her. Well, you see, and you should be thinking about yourself and your son. And then, by the way, what's in her head doesn't matter, but she just doesn't know how awful it is to be alone. I sometimes think for her my death would not be the worst case scenario at all. She's either resigned to it, or well, I don't know. I don't want to say anything bad about her. I have no right to judge your wife either. I just don't understand her at all. But beyond that, I think it's up to you. I'm a stranger in your life altogether," Jennifer said, covering her face with her hands. "Yes, I realize that myself. And you're not an extra person in my life at all. You're the mother of my daughter." Marcus looked at the picture of Elizabeth again. "She does look like me and my mom too. Yes, I have to live for my son and for my daughter. And I don't know myself what came over me when I agreed with Camilla. I'm sorry. I guess I'm a little tired. I'm going to lie down. I don't feel so good." "Should we call a doctor?" Jennifer said worriedly. "You don't have to. I've got medication. I'll call the doctor myself right now, and I'll be sure to call and agree to the surgery. I hope it's not too late to get it done." While they were talking, Jasper came in from school, peered into the room, and realized that Dad was busy. Jennifer was in a hurry. Her daughter was due in soon too. She needed to meet her. They said their goodbyes. Marcus really thought about his future in a new way. He didn't want to die anymore. He wanted to live, to beat the disease, to raise his son and meet his daughter, and maybe mend his relationship with Jennifer. With Camila, though, he didn't even know what would happen now. We'd have to see how she would react to his decision. He called the doctor and informed her of his agreement. I hesitated for a long time, but now I've decided that it's necessary to do the operation. Do you think I'm not too late? I hope not too late. But you need to go back to the clinic and be re-examined. What date do you want to be hospitalized? Tomorrow, Marcus said. And the doctor realized that he was indeed ready. His voice didn't sound as depressed as it had before. He really had the will to live. When Camila had come in, he had told her his decision immediately, and she had been horrified. Marcus, you've decided to ruin Jasper and me completely after all. Don't you realize how dangerous this is? You'll die during the operation or immediately afterwards. What will happen to us? Nothing will happen to you. You'll still have the money. And I, if I agree, will have the chance I'm depriving myself of by refusing the operation. And I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to die. And you don't have to finish that suit. The tailor left it lying around. I realized why you decided to order it. After this conversation, Camila paced irritably around the flat. She had already sorted everything out. She had talked her husband out of the operation, prepared for the funeral, bought herself a mourning dress. And now he's changed his mind. And he really changed. He was lying there with no strength, and now he's suddenly perked up. I wonder what's got into him. Little Jasper came in the way. Mummy, is Daddy going into hospital again? The boy had apparently heard bits and pieces of his parents' conversation. Your daddy's going to go to the hospital. He wants to ruin us. He doesn't know where and why, but he'll leave us penniless. Did he say anything to you when you came home from school? She asked irritably. I didn't say anything. We hardly spoke to him at all. He talked to that aunt who made his suit for him for a long time. What on earth are you saying? What's that supposed to mean? He's barely breathing himself, and he's having affairs with some dressmakers. You can't say anything. Well done, your daddy. Camila dismissed the child and rushed into her husband's room. Well, tell me, darling, what is it that has affected you so much? Was it the conversation with that dressmaker? Come on, don't be shy, tell me. What tales did she tell you? Stop it. Nobody told me anything. Don't I have the right to want to live? Well, I do. And I've already arranged for the operation. I'm not canceling anything. And if you're really interested, fine, I'll confess. This is the woman who made me believe in recovery. We knew each other once. Well, you don't need to know any more than that. One thing I can say is that I want to live and I will fight for my life, Marcus said firmly. However, Camila was not used to backing down. Not even the fact that her husband was seriously ill stopped her. What did it matter when her plans were ruined? First, she made an ugly scene with Marcus himself. Then she called Jennifer. Why did you leave your costume at our house? I decided not to finish it. How could you bitch, meddle in other people's business? I don't know what you said to my Marcus. But just know this, you'll never have it your way. He's my husband, and you can rest assured that he will remain so. I have nothing against it, Jennifer replied in an even tone. And I really hope Marcus will finally stop dancing to your tune. He's still a young man and needs to live, even if you don't like it. And please don't call me again. She hung up. All right, darling, we'll see which side wins. Surgery is a good thing, but it's not a sure thing that it will help. Besides, we're still running out of time. And just because the doctors agreed to operate on him doesn't mean anything. They decided to pay the money, so they cut and stitch him up for money, and then you're done. But he thinks in vain that I'll take care of him after that. I'll even give him a glass of water. I won't bury him either. I'll say there's nothing to bury him with. All the money for treatment. Let that kind dressmaker bury him wherever she wants, even in her garden. And I'll sue the doctors. Why did they cut a man if they couldn't save him anyway? Camila thought angrily. However, she still hoped to dissuade her husband. "Well, don't you realize that my first concern is for you? You are too weak. How will you survive this operation? Let's say you will. And then what? It's not certain that you'll be a healthy person. You'll probably just lie there motionless. And who's going to look after you? Don't count on me, I'm telling you. Let that dressmaker look after you." I realized a long time ago that there is no hope for you, Camilla. So calm down. "I'll do without you," was all Marcus said, who had long since had enough of these arguments with his wife. He could not be dissuaded. A few days later, the operation was done and was quite successful. But at the end, the unexpected happened. Marcus fell into a coma. Camilla, in the image of a grieving wife, ran to the hospital and immediately began to scandalize the doctor. "What do you mean in a coma? You took him in consciousness. You promised to do an operation after which he would be alive and well. But you just turned him into an immobile body. What do we do now? There he lies, not a man, not a dead man. And how am I going to live with a little baby in my arms, by the way? There's nothing you can do about it. It's no one's fault. It's just the way things are. He'll come out of the coma, I hope. But when? No one knows. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now," the doctor explained to her. "In what year? And what am I supposed to do during that year? Pay for this life support system like you're suggesting I do? You've already taken all the money for the surgery as it is. I don't have a penny. I can't pay. So either keep him alive for free or shut it down. I'd rather bury him than deal with a man in his condition. I'm sure he'll need care afterwards." With these words, she turned round and left, without even looking into the intensive care ward where her husband was lying. She didn't care at all. Anger overwhelmed her. After all, everything turned out exactly as she said. The operation had not helped, but it turned him into a helpless body. And the money, by the way, was gone, and a lot of it, and all her plans had collapsed. After all, how it was all calculated. Camilla thought she would bury her husband soon and then finally marry the man she loved. Yes, she'd had another for a long time, who was also bored with his role as a lover. She had kept him by her side lately, with nothing but gifts and cash infusions. She just needed an official marriage. And now it turns out, and no money, and the wedding will not be. You can't divorce a man when he's in a helpless position. Camilla also cared about her reputation, but about the lack of money, she still somewhat exaggerated. The firm remained, she continued to be practically a full owner. And it remained to be seen whether her husband would come out of his coma or not. One must, ahead of events, seize the moment. Marcus, from the looks of things. Anything is to be expected. Camilla decided not to wait, but to withdraw as much money as possible into her account. Even if her husband didn't die, she wasn't going to live with him and would file for divorce. Really, how much longer do I have to ruin my life? Years go by, youth passes. You will not notice how life will pass, and next to whom? That loser Marcus, who's sick and between life and death. I'm a perfectly normal woman and I want to live preferably with the person I love, not with just anyone, she thought as she walked home from the hospital. She didn't even notice that Jennifer was outside the doctor's office, also concerned about Marcus. Jennifer was there and she heard Camilla talking to the doctor and realized that the man she loved was in mortal danger. She too went to the doctor and asked about the condition of the patient. The doctor repeated to her all the same things he had told Camilla and voiced the cost of keeping Marcus alive. Jennifer was horrified. She certainly didn't have that kind of money. "But what will we do if no one pays? He'll have to die," she asked in despair. "You see, it's not up to me here. This machine is not my own. With all my desire, I can't do anything about it. Of course, something free can be applied, but it is far from certain that it will save him. We can only hope that the patient will come to his senses and be able to breathe on his own. Although if his health is so important to you, you can announce a fundraiser, apply to foundations, or find funds somehow. I'm sorry, of course. In this situation, it's the only way out." "I'll get that money," Jennifer said firmly. A desperate plan already matured in her mind. "Just please don't you dare switch it off. He has to live for sure. He has 2 children after all." What she had in mind was frightening Jennifer herself. She had decided to sell the only thing she had, her flat. Yeah, It wouldn't fetch much, especially since it would have to be done quickly. But still, it will give at least some respite from the death of a loved one. She and her daughter would have to live somewhere, and she had no one to rely on. But Jennifer didn't see it that way. She hoped for Marcus, that he would come to his senses, and that the money she would raise would be enough to save his life. And if it's not enough, what if I lose everything again? But at least my conscience will be clear. I did everything I could. Jennifer came home and immediately started selling the flat, and was soon able to pay the necessary amount to the clinic. Marcus, meanwhile, remained all the same. Camilla, of course, was busy with her own affairs and was not interested in her husband's condition. She was just waiting for the hospital to call her and tell her to take care of her husband's funeral. And that's when I'll tell them who should be in charge of his funeral. They lied to me completely, and now it's my fault, she thought. Jennifer visited Marcus every day at the hospital. She took time off work and sat with him for hours, talking to the man she loved, telling him about her life without him, sharing her dreams for the future. She thought Marcus couldn't hear her, so she could talk to him about anything without embarrassment. He wouldn't remember anything once he came to his senses. And what happens afterwards? Suppose he returns to his wife and son. It doesn't matter much. She's had enough of this happiness. She still met her beloved, was able to help him, was by his side for a while. Maybe even after he comes to his senses, Camilla will not want her husband back. She was the first to notice, without any doctors and examinations, that Marcus' condition was improving. He did not come to his senses immediately, but the doctor examined him and said that the situation was better. The dynamics was there, which meant that the wait was not long. And indeed, Marcus woke up and was very happy to see his love by the bed. "Jennifer, are you here? And I felt you were always there, didn't I?" he said in a weak voice. "I was talking to you." "Did you hear?" she asked. "I don't know, but I think I heard. You told me about Elizabeth, too, when she was very little. I remember that one." Oh. Tears of joy streamed down Jennifer's face. Marcus had finally come to his senses, and hopefully he would be well soon. Finally out of the hospital, healthy and strong as he had once been. It didn't even matter to her that he might not be going to her. But Marcus, coming more and more to his senses, didn't even ask about his wife. Apparently he realized she hardly visited him and worried about his condition. It turned out that she was worried about his condition, but only about material things. While Marcus was in the hospital, she managed to reissue all the documents, transfer to herself all his money, as well as the company, which she sold. By the time Marcus was discharged, their flat had been sold as well. Camilla was already packing. Her reputation apparently no longer bothered her. She had decided to make a complete break with her old life. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus wondered, entering the trash flat. "I think we're still married. How could you sell something without my consent?" "That's easy. You think we're still married. I think I divorced you in absentia. It's very simple. You can do anything you want for money. You can marry, divorce, or die. You did a totally unnecessary operation. I told you not to do it. If you don't care what I think, I don't care what you think. And don't worry too much. You're keeping most of your stuff. I'm going away with my new husband. Far away. I'll leave you some money too. Enough for the first time. Maybe you'll earn it later. If you're a healthy man now, of course. If you're sick, lie down and die. By the way, you can keep your son too. I'm not going to babysit him." Jasper was glad to see his daddy back. He ran up to him and stood hugging him tightly, looking at his mother unkindly. "Dad, I'm staying with you, aren't I? You're not going to leave me anywhere. I don't want to be with her, especially not with another dad." "He's mean in general," Jasper said. "Of course we'll be together, son. Everything you've done, Camilla, let it stay with you. I don't care about that right now. I have a new life starting myself, and it will certainly be a happy one. I am very glad for you. All the best," and Camilla picked up the bales of her belongings and left the flat. Marcus called Jennifer and told her the latest news. "That's the way it is, Jennifer. I'm left with almost nothing. Well, I mean with my son, the bare minimum of money, some stuff I don't know where to put since the flat is gone." Marcus, that's all nonsense. I really don't have a flat now either. I rent a dorm room. I think you can do the same or come and visit us. Elizabeth and I are waiting for you and Jasper too. So unexpectedly and unusually, the family didn't worry about past losses. The important thing was that they were all together, loving each other. What more could they want? Marcus didn't have to rent a dorm room. He rented a small but cozy flat where he and Jennifer and their 2 children could live. The money Camila had left him and the money he'd made from the sale of his belongings were enough for that. It was necessary to get used to the usual simple life, to find a job, to take care of the children and each other. Camila and her beloved were not going to go abroad forever. They went on a cruise. The money was enough for this trip. And for life after it. At least that's what she thought. But apparently she miscalculated. Or he, who was almost Camila's husband, had his own plans. Soon after his return, he found another lady of his heart and left Camila alone, without a flat and almost without money. Realizing that she could not survive on her own, she started to look for her ex-husband, hoping that if he would not take her back, he would at least help her in some way. He is a working man. He is probably not poor. She was not wrong about that. Marcus was doing well, but she couldn't expect him to take her back. While his ex-wife had been away, he'd managed to terminate her parental rights. This was not affected by the fact that one day it turned out that Jasper was not Marcus's own son. The boy fell ill, had his blood tested, and it turned out that he could not be his father's own son. Marcus took a DNA test, and it came back positive. Jasper wasn't his son. Even Camila had lied about that. But what did it matter? After all, he was the one who had raised the boy from birth. Elizabeth was his own daughter, and he was just beginning to get to know her. But he had always thought of his son as his own, and continued to do so, even after the truth was revealed. It had no effect on his attitude. Nor did it affect his refusal to give Jasper to the returning Camila. However, his son had no intention of going back to her himself. "My mom's Jennifer," he said, "and you left with that uncle, so live with him." So Camila left with nothing, once again hoping to build her new life without money, without a child, and without the man she loved. But Marcus, having a rich experience in business and connections, quite quickly reached the position of a top manager and gradually created his own company. A year later, they had already moved into their own spacious flat and no longer needed anything.
It seems that everyone, absolutely everyone, when summer vacation comes, goes traveling. And in the fall, during the first days of September, no one has time for lessons. Mildred's classmates tell who has been where, trying to remember the brightest moments and outdo each other. Olin in Thailand rode an elephant. Caleb in Egypt with his parents went on a desert safari, and at night, together with other tourists, climbed Mount Moses to meet the dawn. Emily found Bulgaria boring. Max enjoyed diving in the Red Sea. Mildred was sent to the country every summer. And not even to her own grandmother, but to some seventh water on the vine. And it was especially hurt Mildred could tell her grandmother where Mildred had seen this vegetable garden. These stupid chickens who wanted to peck her hands, and for diving, there was only a river, which the same chickens would wade across. But try telling that to your 7th great-grandmother. Delia Gassman had been the school's vice principal for the last 20 years, and Mildred's parents were particularly fond of it. "Well, I'll rest easy. She'll be able to keep an eye on you," Mom said. She didn't rely on herself. Mom was a forever girl kind of girl. When her father went away on a business trip, Mildred felt like they were having some kind of naughty holiday at home. Mom hated to cook. To stand at the stove for her meant to live her life. Go shopping, carry bags, spend half a day at the stove, then eat everything in 20 minutes and then feed the toilet. Mom asked from the ceiling as if she were some kind of supreme judge. When Mildred and her mother were alone, it was sandwiches, coffee and ice cream, and movies, some of them better than others, without regard to bedtime. Dad would come home and everything would go back to normal. Mom would make dinner for 3 days, the family would gather around the table, and at 10 o'clock Mildred would be sent to bed, even if tomorrow was a day off. So her mother secretly reproached herself for her weakness of character if she was so relieved to hand her daughter over to the cold. pedantic hands of Delia Gasman for 3 summer months. Man, in the little room where Mildred was put in by her 7th cousin's grandmother, there wasn't even a door to close. There was a curtain, and in the first days of her arrival, when Mildred wanted to throw up and throw down, she had to restrain herself and behave. What a foreign word it was in her vocabulary, in an honorable manner. Afterward, however, everything was all right. Some summer her friends appeared, and then they were waiting for Mildred to arrive, and no sooner had she taken her things out of her traveling bag than Clarissa and Sami were already peering in at the window, and Delia Gasman was raising her voice. Oh, the front garden. Flowers. Through the door, please. The girls didn't. They had preferred to stay away from the head teacher since their school days. Clarissa made a gesture with her chin towards the street. Say, come with us, as it took a minute to kick off her shoes and change into sandals. And then a light jumped through the window. The body itself remembered last year's skill, and that was it. Summer had begun. There was internet in the village house. Slow, weak, but it worked. Show me a spot on the map that isn't covered by the World Wide Web. One time Mildred couldn't take it anymore and she jumped. She and the girls trickled into the House of Culture. It was the end of a meeting of the locals, and afterwards they were supposed to show a movie. They were just early. An aunt from the stage was talking tediously about the state of the roads. And behind the girls sat 2 grandmothers, real village old ladies gaunt in scarves. And one was telling the other what her new cell phone could do. Wait, interrupted the second one. Do you have Bluetooth or what? In short, the internet was there. But after a few days, it turned out that there was no time for it, because adventures on the 5th point can be found not only on the Mountain of Moses, and if you do not drown in the virtual world, the real world is extreme. Here is the lake at the edge of the village. Long, narrow, curved, half-submerged. Its left end is not that uninteresting, it is even unpleasant, because the shores are built up. Vegetable gardens run down to the water, and you are like in a shop window and constantly disturbing someone. That geese meet to swim, that men after a bath, to swim from the bridge, that deaf grandfather to fish. And you get a beating from everyone, even from... But if you go to the right end of the lake, oh, that's another matter. You have to get there along the shore, along those very little visible paths, which to a stranger's eye seem completely unnoticeable, and the thicket itself, impenetrable, but you know everything. And there is already a ravine, over which there is a bridge, like from a horror movie, at the bottom of the ravine running brook, and the bridge as if the forest built from such old, gaunt trunks and branches that every time you think, I will be the last one who will risk to cross it, under me it, and collapse. But behind the bridge the thicket parted, and the lake lay, enclosed in precipitous banks, and no one around. The forest, looking out of the bushes, a mermaid that looks at you from the depths, although in reality, here can appear only cat scientist, and that if Vasca brought from home and tied to a tree. Delia Gasman didn't really keep Mildred in line. The rules to obey were few and simple. No running out for a walk without breakfast. Watch your appearance. Dirty clothes, wash them. Torn clothes, sew them up. After dark, go home. Though Mildred sometimes violated the last rule mercilessly. Otherwise, how could she and the girls walk along the star paths? There were plenty of fireflies in the vicinity of the village. Both Clarissa and Sami had been dismissive of them before. So what if they were bugs with glowing asses? Clarissa said. But when the ordinary road along the field, so dull and dusty by day, so dull and dusty by night, called to Mildred with a witch's light, she was utterly mesmerized. It was as if the night sky was now on every side. The stars twinkled above her head and under her feet, one by one, as if by themselves. Fairy stories were born. Mildred did not admit to the girls that she had composed them herself. She said she had read them in books. Her friends listened with their mouths ajar, believing, frightened, and as they did not want to make a fool of themselves, they tried to tell Mildred something comparable about the local countryside. Near Sami began. At the other end of the field, there's the Barzer's garden. They say there used to be a house there before the revolution, where a baron lived. Nothing is left of the house, but you can go to the garden even now. But everything there has been wild for a long time. Shallow and sour. And where the river is, well, where the cape is, you, Clarissa, picked up. There's a dig. The ancient people lived there like monkeys. Archaeologists used to come there, digging in the ground. It's all broken crockery, pots and pans, as if they were always fighting with each other and throwing dishes. There's a dead man lying further away. Sami inserted. There the earth has crumbled a little and a grave has appeared. But it's not scary, it's ancient. And you can't even dig it up yet because you need some special permission. Clarissa was silent for a moment, and then she said as if she were revealing a secret. The scary ones are werewolves. Mom, come on, Mildred couldn't take it anymore. It's all understandable, the movies, Twilight. Tell me about the vampires. But Clarissa was neither embarrassed nor angry, but said even sadly, "It's not me, that's what the grown-ups say." Well, yes, I know that you have hunting grounds here, and at the edge of the forest, there is a banner saying that hunting is forbidden. Just imagine, one hunter says to another, "Let's go, maybe we'll get lucky today and kill a couple werewolves." Usami usually giggled at every occasion, but she didn't. Clarissa began to explain, "It's a shame we don't have any tall houses here to climb up and see, except for the water tower, but it's locked, and you have to get in. If you look from up high, you can see a mountain behind the forest, and behind it, no one's been going there for a long time. At first, they wouldn't let us in. Just some men in uniform stood there and wouldn't let them in. They said there was some treasure hidden there. Sami was in a hurry to say, as if there was a treasure in the mountain itself, and then either the treasure ended. What do you mean, ran out? Clarissa's voice was irritated. Or it was found and taken away, or it never existed at all. The thing is, there's a place down there where werewolves live. That's where they keep people safe from them. Because they could attack like wolves if someone alone or in pairs wandered into those parts. Mildred was tempted to give up. It was all right to lie, but don't lie too much. It's one thing when she talks about distant galaxies and aliens. It's clear fantasy. Fairy tales, that's also understandable. Things of bygones, you can even tickle your nerves. Imagine that on the eve of Ivan Cupola mermaids, lounging on the shore, bathing in the moonlight. But do not go to the forest because you don't even have ordinary wolves here, said Mildred. Why are you inventing some a for the first time in her memory? She felt that Clarissa was offended. She was the bravest of the three of them, not afraid to swim in the river, even though it had whirlpools and eddies. She could go into the garden at night, but here, apparently, her courage was at an end. Something prevented her from crossing the line. And Mildred's careless remark poked at the sore spot. Clarissa wanted to change the subject, but she couldn't. "We can get closer," she said with a challenge. "We can get to Red Lake, and then I'll show you the..." Mildred wasn't going to go there, and she wasn't allowed to go any farther, and she knew from Clarissa's tone that it would be a long walk. "It's no big deal. Come on, let's just look. And we won't get lost. It's concrete. When you're tired, turn back and that's it. If it's hot, you can go swimming in the lake. And of animals, the worst is if you meet a wild boar. Let's go." Clarice seemed to be on fire herself, characterized by her ability to soften sharp corners. Again, found an option. There's plenty of strawberries. We can take some Biden jars with us. I could either make it between breakfast and lunch or between lunch and dinner. Mildred thought, already giving up. Otherwise, grandmother would make me stay home for 3 days. But no matter what they thought, it was not possible to set out until the afternoon. "This morning I was captain of the potato field," complained Mildred, "and it's just endless. And every bush has to be looked under the tail, weed and perch. To mother on the boat, why do people need so many potatoes, eh?" The girls only giggled. They took such labor for granted. At first the road seemed very beautiful to Mildred. She had never been here before, and everything fascinated her. There was the meadow drowned in flowers, the bridge over the river where she could linger and watch the flocks of fish scurrying under the water, and the unusually picturesque withered tree on the other side of the river, which looked like the figure of a huge witch from a distance. But at the end of the second hour of the journey, my legs were tired and my impressions lacked freshness. There was indeed a concrete track under my feet, long ago laid slabs, partly buried in the ground and overgrown with grass. The road turned and again rushed forward, and on the sides was the same forest. Hadn't we had enough? Mildred was the first to ask. "We've got a long way to go. Let's just rest a little." "Wait, There will be a lake now. Sammy reassured her. This is the last place where people from our village go fishing. Further, no. And why is it red? Mildred asked without much interest. She was too tired. Is there any special water here? Nope. There used to be a village nearby, and it was called so. Beautiful, I mean. But the lake is just an ordinary lake. And it's not very nice to swim here. Only in one place, but the shores are too boggy. Then they saw motorcycles at the edge of the road. A sign that the fishermen were really here. Oh, let's go farther away, Clarissa suggested. They're fishing, and we'll swim. One of her grandmother's injunctions was not to swim in strange places. But it was so hot and they wanted to get into the cool water. When they came to the lake, a small lake lost in the woods. Clarissa raised her eyebrows. I haven't been here for a long time. I don't remember. Let's find this beach. Let's go one to the left, one to the right along the shore. Mildred went to the left, not noticing that Sammy obediently stepped to the right, behind Clarissa. There were no paths here. Only the shore of the lake could serve as a landmark. Mildred walked and looked for the place where the shores were overgrown with reeds and where there would be sand. She knew from experience that here, in the silence, every sound traveled far. Either she would call the girls, or they would call her. Here, the coastal bushes parted. The shallow water opened, and the sand on the shore was white. Where? Cried Mildred. But there was absolute silence. No one answered her. That ringing silence when it feels like you're alone in the world. It just couldn't be. Mildred knew she had not gone far. Well, 10 minutes, no more, as she wandered alone along the shore. At most, the girls had gone the same distance, but in the other direction. It's not that you can't shout to each other, you can hear each other call, but there are still fishermen. It could not be. So it was necessary to take control and calm down. And then when she and the girls would meet, all together they would laugh at the fact that the fearless girl from the city was so scared in the first minutes when she was left alone. Even impossible to get lost here. Even though there was no path, the lake shore was right there. You just had to face it. If she went to the left, she would have to go back to the right. That's all, so Mildred said to herself. But as she looked around the lake and its shore, she saw no sign that people were near. It was the same silence, the shores overgrown with reeds, and a sky that was beginning to frown. It looked like a thunderstorm was. Just walk, Mildred said to herself. Walk and think of nothing. And everything will end right now. If not on the girls, then on these men fishermen, I'll definitely come across. She walked on, but nothing, exactly nothing, was happening. Tired, scratched against branches and twigs, sweaty and bruised, Mildred was ready to cry. Finally, she realized that the impossible had happened. She was lost. Mildred tried to remember the map. Several times she and the girls had looked at the satellite map on her cell phone, figuring out what was around and where else to go. It looked like the forest stretched for many kilometers, but that was only if you stood. Again, facing the lake, and on all other sides there were villages quite close to each other. To reach at least the concrete road or the river, there is no fear there. The river will sooner or later lead to another village. If not today, then tomorrow. Mildred shuddered as she imagined spending the night alone in the forest. But if there was no way out, well, maybe she would have to. There are no large animals here, only wild boars. They don't eat people. It seems there are also vipers. He and the girls almost stepped on one. They were running to the river, and it was crawling across the road. It was like a trickle of black water. Vipers are not so poisonous that they can kill you. Nothing will happen to her, Mildred. If it's too scary, you can stay awake. Just sit somewhere and wait till dawn. The thing is, she was desperately scared right now. So much so that she didn't even think about how worried her grandmother would be and what panic her parents would feel when she told them. And grandmother would tell them. For now, Mildred feared only for herself. She decided to walk until dark, and then she would see. And perhaps she should have made as much noise as possible. It would scare away the forest predators, are there lynxes here or not? And maybe attract people's attention, but how to make noise? Shouting, perhaps singing would be better. Mildred coughed and sang, and almost immediately, she didn't even realize how it happened. It was as if the spasm that had been gripping her throat until now had finally released. Her voice changed, became rich, sonorous, ringing with silver notes. Never had she sung like that. If it had been a large concert hall instead of a vast forest, Mildred's voice would have filled every corner of it. She sang everything. The simple songs she had learned at school, in music class, and those she had heard on television. Her own voice encouraged her and supported her and even made her a little dizzy. And then he saw it. On a small hill overgrown with hazel trees sat a wolf and listened to her intently. There was no doubt in her mind that it was a wolf. It is not true that these predators are called gray, and they also say eyes smart like a man. No, Six was not gray, but multicolored, iridescent. There you have brown and silver and almost white, and the look. He wasn't just intelligent, he was wise. Beastly wisdom, much older than humans. It must have been a scout wolf, because they usually hunt in packs. Or families, like in Mowgli. For a moment, Mildred tried to remember everything she knew about wolves, and then realized it was useless. Despair gripped her. She didn't know how to climb trees. There was no other way to escape, but there was already a man standing next to the wolf. It was a young man, maybe a few years older than Mildred. The wolf was not a werewolf, had not taken on human form. The young man put his hand on its scruff and just stood there. Maybe Mildred should have been more frightened. A meeting in the woods with a stranger could have far more terrible consequences than a fleeting acquaintance with a predator. But the girl did not think about it. She was relieved. "Oh, what are you doing here?" The young man asked in surprise. "Looking," said Mildred. "I lost my..." He thought for a few moments, then nodded. "It happens here. Are you from..." Mildred heard the name of a familiar village and nodded. "You won't make it back tonight," he said. Come. You'll spend the night at our place, and tomorrow I'll take you." "Who's your place?" Her fear was awake in her again, and the question gave it away. "We live nearby, our village. Come on, your mother will feed you." Until now, Mildred hadn't thought she was hungry. But now, and really did she have a choice? Only to trust this boy. He was about 15 or 16 years old by the looks of it. He would have been very handsome, blue-eyed with correct features. The only thing that spoiled him was the scar across his lips. But his hair was good, golden, curly, in a lush cap. I guess he didn't like the barber shop. "Follow me," the young man said to Mildred, and so calmly went to the thicket as if the thought that he could get lost did not even cross his mind. Is it, wolf?" Mildred asked timidly. He turned around. "A couple of years ago, my father's dog ran away into the woods in the spring and apparently walked with a wolf. They wanted to drown the puppies, saying they wouldn't grow into anything good, only chickens. But I didn't let them. Now no dog can compare to him. A hunter's dream, a cerco. Don't worry, he won't hurt anyone unless I tell him to." Peter followed the boy, but she walked with all her might and could not adjust to his steps. They were too flying, and the new acquaintance felt something. He stopped, waited for Mildred, and took her hand. His palm was very stiff. "Oh, and why do you say that this happens here?" The girl asked. "It's a special place," he explained. "It has happened many times before. A man goes on his way, but he comes out in the place from which he started. Or he gets lost, and God knows where he comes out." Mildred thought that she would have nothing against going back to the place from which she had set out on this crazy journey. Her grandmother's house. "Why do you come here yourself?" she asked. "If it's so dangerous here." He turned around and grinned slightly with mangled lips. "And we are local. It doesn't touch us. We're well, to put it simply, the old believers. We have a different faith. That's why we live in a special way. It started with my great-grandfather that didn't quite understand what he was talking about. But she was much calmer now than before. She clung to the hand of her new acquaintance, and somehow it happened that now she was not afraid of the forest, with all its predators and the approaching night. Even her legs seemed to have stopped whining. Only she was more and more hungry. Circo trudged ahead without looking back. "You sing well," said the young man. "I've never heard anyone sing like that before." "None of ours. Only once on the radio. We can't have all that. TV, radio. I was in town with my grandfather. I heard it there by chance." "Oh, I've never heard it before." Madrid wanted to explain that she'd never thought she had any ability before. And she wasn't very good at music lessons. But then the forest parted and the new acquaintance. Here we are." Mildred thought it was a movie. It was a tiny village, maybe a dozen or so houses, all log houses, none of them stone. There were such houses where her grandmother lived too, but many of them were abandoned with empty windows. The villagers dismantled the abandoned huts and sometimes even burned them. Here there was not a single abandoned house. It was obvious that everyone was taken, and her new acquaintance hadn't lied to her, hadn't led her to a remote place. People lived here. The grandfather, thin, gray-bearded but sturdy, called out to them in surprise. "My, Vince, who have you brought?" "Oh, the girl has lost her way." The young man raised his voice. "I'll take her home tomorrow." He turned to his companion. What's your name?" "Mildred." Vincent had only one mother. His father died last year. The mother, a burly woman with a pleasant, good-natured face, was even more amazed when she saw Mildred. "Lord, so little and so far gone." "Well, where have you gone from home, my dear?" "Oh, she didn't go that far," Vincent explained. "She was just at the lake with her friends." Her mother was silent and nodded understandingly. She fed Mildred, and Mildred thought she had never had such delicious borscht, and the porridge with mushrooms was good too. And the tea, strange in Mildred's mind, was not even tea at all but just brewed herbs and honey, the like of which she had never tasted before. Green as an emerald, with this kind woman by her side, Mildred became quite calm. Aunt Grace, as the owner introduced herself, then lamented that Mildred's relatives must be going crazy. The child was missing, then asked the girl not to make such distant trips or just stroked her head. "As soon as it's dawn, Vince will take you back," Aunt Grace reassured her. "I feel sorry for your grandmother today. What a night it will be for her." "Oh, maybe she'll realize I've come to see you," Mildred suggested. "Oh, it's been a long time since anyone's been here. I think people have forgotten we live here. Either we are here or we are not." Mildred remembered her friends telling her legends about werewolves, which, of course, didn't exist. Maybe the memory that there were humans in the forest had become distorted and had given rise to these stories. "Don't tell anyone about us either," Aunt Grace said, "or the curious will start coming here, and we don't want them to." She made Mildred's bed in a separate corner behind the stove. She showed her where to wash up and brought her nightgown. Don't you ever go anywhere from here." Mildred's eyes were drooping, but curiosity still got the better of her. The girl thought that even this bed, on which she was now settled, an iron bed with a frame net, not here, in this remote village made, why, our men come, they bring it to us when we need something. But they rarely come out. Journalists came here, it happened. Someone tipped them off. But for us, this fame is worse than a bitter radish. Leave us to live with God alone. Aunt Grace said something else, but Mildred was almost asleep. Still, she heard people still knocking at the hut. They came asking about the girl, that is, about her. Apparently, the appearance of the little guest was a big event. It seemed to Mildred that Aunt Grace touched her shoulder as soon as she closed her eyes. "Oh, it's dawning," she said. "Come on, it's time to go home." Vince was already waiting for her, sitting at the table. Aunt Grace fed them both, poured a large mug of milk, and cut some bread. Mildred thought of the few times she and her grandmother had sat like this, by candlelight, when the power went out in the village. Not only her legs, but her whole body ached from yesterday's walk, and Mildred was preparing herself for a long walk today. "Maybe all day," Zian said. "Are you eating well?" Aunt Grace asked. "Oh, it's kind of the first time I've tried it." Mildred tried to sing something and was amazed. She didn't have any special voice. I mean, just her usual squeaky voice, the kind of voice that made the music teacher wave his hand hopelessly. No sooner had Mildred thought she must be in a bad way than Aunt Grace said, "Oh, it happens. So it's a gift from above, but not forever. But at times like this," which she put her arm around Mildred and crossed her. "Well, go child, go children." That was the end of the village for her. There was no reprimand, only the tears of her mother and grandmother. Her father, who had turned black and gray that night, as if he had suffered a serious illness, and the triumph of those who were part of the search party, because they had found the girl alive, and in such a short time, Mildred was not even allowed to talk to her friends. Clarissa and Sammy looked at her guiltily from behind other people's backs, made some signs, but Mildred never managed to tell them what had happened to her. In fact, she told no one the truth. Somehow it happened that she got lost. She knew that the forests were vast. She thought she would never get out, but luckily she heard the voices of the rescuers. At night in the forest was very scary. It's good that summer nights are that's all anyone who tried to question her learned from her. A day later, Mildred was taken to town. Her frivolous mother had certainly grown up during that terrible 24 hours. She took a vacation, and until the 1st of September, she never left her daughter's side, except to hold her hand. God showed me what could happen. The unbelieving mother repeated, "Thank God everything was all right." Then school started. It was good that it was literally in the yard. Otherwise, probably, Mom would have quit to take her daughter to classes and to meet her when the lessons are over. School and English class, that was it. Mildred was not allowed to go anywhere else alone. She was allowed to bring her friends, as many as she wanted and whenever she wanted, to surf the internet even 24 hours a day, to listen to music without headphones, but only at home. Her parents took her out on weekends. Mildred didn't remember that before they went somewhere like this, the whole family, to the movies or the water park, out of town for a picnic or to a big shopping mall. The three of them went on vacation together now. And for the remaining 2 summer months, Mildred was sent to camp, where the teachers kept an eye on their charges and counted them by their heads. All this ended when Mildred graduated from high school and entered the institute. She liked English, she wanted to study the language, and she could not imagine any other way for herself. Her parents had to realize that the former control over her was the girl was preparing for exhausting explanations with her mother, for attempts to appeal to reason. But something happened that she hadn't expected. Her father had left the family. It was so trivial. He met a young woman almost the same age as his daughter, and the sober, punctual, ultra-responsible father who had been the captain of their family ship all these years had abandoned the vessel to the waves. Mildred expected it to be a terrible blow to her mother. She would become depressed, perhaps even go into bed, but she could not suppose that her mother, determined to prove everything to everybody, would marry within a year. Her father had left the apartment to his ex-wife and daughter. Her mother's new boyfriend had moved in with them, and Mildred felt superfluous. She liked studying very much. She was one of the best in the course. She realized at the time of studenthood, this is a prolonged childhood. Still, she dreamed of the time when she would start working, and immediately, on her first paycheck, she would rent an apartment, even the smallest, simplest. But from that day on, her own life would begin as she saw it. However, even here, everything did not go according to Mildred's scenario. First of all, she saw herself as a translator of fiction, but she couldn't find such a place. But where she was willingly taken, it is in school. A teacher of English. The constant staff turnover in pedagogy led to the fact that the director met a girl with no experience almost with open arms. But Mildred only lasted 6 months. As a subject teacher, she was good. The boys could learn a lot from her. But when it came to discipline, she couldn't bring the students to order. They could do anything but English in class, crouched down. The boys ran between the rows, did their math homework, ate the ice cream they raced to the kiosk for at recess, and talked to each other without lowering their voices. When Mildred returned home, her head was buzzing and tears came to her eyes from her own helplessness. Her salary was so small that it was clear that if she rented an apartment, she would have to starve because she had no strength for a part-time job. So when Mildred saw the ad, she thought she was dreaming. A well-to-do family was looking for an English teacher for a boy of 10. Living in the countryside, of course, housing was provided, decent conditions, including food. The ad was already 3 days old, and Mildred had no doubt she was late. Still, she sent an email since the advertiser preferred messages rather than calls. Beard wasn't hoping for anything. She had almost no seniority, and she didn't give the impression of being too serious. A short, thin girl of 24, painfully shy and insecure. She was all the more startled when the bell rang and a man's voice invited her to go for an interview. Mildred squeaked. "Oh, why should she? You can start work and then we'll see." "No, just like that. You don't know anything about me." Darling, these days, thanks to the internet, you can find out a lot about a person. So you're welcome to come, unless you've changed your mind. Mildred's new master. How strange it was to hear the word master. Probably employer was better. Was called Aaron Jaeger. For the first time, the girl decided to go without her things, and without saying anything at home. She felt that her mother would awaken her old fears, and she would not let her go. Mildred herself would hardly have found this place if it hadn't been for the cab driver with his navigator. And he'd never been here before. Winter forest, narrow road. It was not far from the village where Mildred used to spend her summers, but up. Wow, said the cab driver when they finally reached the village. They've built a real castle. It was a very beautiful house, not unlike the mansions of the new Russians. They seemed to boast of their wealth, no matter that taste was often sacrificed. This house, on the other hand, looked as if it had stepped out of the pages of a fairy tale about the Middle Ages. It wasn't that big, but it breathed harmony. Everything was in place. The turrets, the stained glass windows, the small balconies, no bigger than swallows' nests. And even the fence, which resembled metal lace topped with sharp peaks. "Wait for me, please," said Mildred to the taxi driver. I won't be long, I guess. I can't get out of here alone. Wait, I'll pay. She was sure that, having seen her with her own eyes, Aaron Lovovich would, of course, refuse her immediately. And she also had no doubt that in such a large house there were, of course, servants. Probably these women were better dressed than herself, and they would look at her with contempt. She was opened by an elderly man with an unassuming, unrecognizable face. "Oh, I know," he said. When Mildred tried to explain who she was, "You are expected. Come along." Inside, everything was decorated in the same old-fashioned way. She wanted to go up the stairs to see what the castle was like on the upper floors. But she was led down a hall, and a servant opened a heavy oak door. It was a study, with bookshelves to the ceiling, a massive desk on which, however, stood something very far from antique, a laptop computer. And then a man rose from behind the desk, and Mildred forgot all about it. "Why, he looks like a young devil," flashed through her mind. If devils can be young, devilish character or not. There was something of Mephistopheles about him, very tall and very thin, all angular of some sort. The man greeted them with a lush black hair curled in fine, chemical curls, jagged, expressive eyebrows, and light green eyes so bright it was as if he wore lenses. A black suit, and a smile from ear to ear. Aaron Jaeger was good-looking, but it was the beauty of an engraving. No softness, just sharp edges. Here you are," he said. "I'm glad." He shook both of Mildred's hands and seemed slow to release them. The servant was no longer in the study. "Oh, I wanted to talk about work." She reminded him hurriedly, trying to make the awkward situation end sooner. He released her hands at last, but kept smiling. "Oh, I'll introduce you to the boy now. Have I already told you that he is ill?" "No, cerebral palsy, as they say." "Cerebral palsy. His ex-wife left him to me, and I didn't want Vivian to suffer in an institution. So he'll get everything he needs at home." "Oh, does he have other teachers?" Mildred felt the ground beneath her feet, and Jaeger shook his head. "One at a time. I don't want to overload him. The boy is weak, you'll see. Last year he took literature, this year English, and so on. Come on, I'll show you around, including your room. They're waiting for me." Mildred did not say that it was only a cab. She wanted to leave herself an escape route. "I have to come back today to get my things." Aaron Jaeger raised his eyebrow. "Good. Let it be just a short tour then. I'll show you the apprentice first." That's when they finally climbed the stairs. And Mildred thought that Aaron Jaeger could easily walk 3 steps. "Please," the master opened the door for her, as the servant had done before. Mildred thought at first that there was no one in the spacious, bright room. An invalid's chair by the table, with its back to the door. Then she caught sight of a pale. Aaron Jaeger turned the chair around in one graceful, dancing movement, and Mildred saw a boy who was not even 10, but 7 years old. Round, ugly glasses, a pale, almost transparent face, and a detached look. The child looked through Mildred and did not react when Aaron Jaeger noisily introduced him to the girl and her to her future pupil. True, the boy nodded politely so that hardly anyone could reproach him for anything. But Mildred had to take the initiative. "Oh, do you want to study English?" she asked the boy affectionately, putting her hand on his shoulder, and she felt that sharp shoulder shudder under his hand. And again that indifferent, polite nod. "I can say English, or Chinese, or Synchrofasatron, and of course I can't help showing you to your room." Aaron Jaeger walked in front of her, back to front, still smiling with his 32 teeth. Please, never had Mildred thought she would be living in a tower. In a small, almost circular room, where all day long the sun went from one window to another, and at night The same route was taken by the month. The bed, even from afar, seemed soft and very comfortable, and how glorious it would be to read in that ancient armchair, sitting by the window. Well, no one will disturb you here. And Jager was glad as a boy when Mildred said she would move in tomorrow. In fact, for minutes he seemed younger than his little son. At any rate, there was much more emotion and spontaneity in him. Mildred kept her word. When she returned home, she had been packing all evening. The distances were quite long, and if she had forgotten something, it would not be easy to drive to get it. Then she called her mom and told her she had started a new job. She'd be living in the country. And now, if they decided to meet, they would have to make arrangements in advance. Mom, with her usual curiosity, tried to find out all the details, but Mildred could not tell her much yet. A sick boy, small, sweet, whom she would teach. A salary far above what she had gotten at her old. Is this boy's father married? Mom asked, hitting the mark, as always. Maintiate you registers. So if the man is nice and rich, don't waste your time. Try to glue him together, her mother advised, completely ignoring the fact that Mildred had no experience in gluing. As she fell asleep, she thought about how to show herself at the new place with the best side and what methodology to teach English to the boy, whose strength seems to be enough only to live a little. In the first few weeks of work, Mildred was still surprised at Vivian's behavior. He seemed to regard lessons as an unpleasant chore that could not be avoided. He had no special aptitude for language, but he studied faithfully everything Mildred assigned him. And if he had been an ordinary schoolboy, he would have earned a solid B. He did not try to distract the teacher. Didn't make small talk with her. He answered the questions asked, and that was all. Sometimes Mildred herself, on her own initiative, tried to ask him about his father, about his mother, but received meager one-word answers. The boy did not seem to long for his mother, though she had left the family not long ago. Nor did he seem to be happy about his father, though Aaron Jager dropped by a couple of times during classes, and all the furnishings around spoke of how he spoiled his son. Expensive furniture, specially adapted for the disabled, toys that Mildred had never seen in stores. Probably they were sent from abroad, but Vivian was completely indifferent to these luxuries. Not once did Mildred catch him playing. The same could not be said of his father. Indifference did not apply to Aaron Jager. He was a lump of energy and emotion. At first, Mildred thought that in his house she would fall into the category of servants, but the owner behaved with her more like a guest. They dined and dined together, with a large dining room, and Aaron Jager always entertained Mildred, most often with stories of his travels. He had traveled all over the world, paying particular attention to Southeast Asia with its exotic tradition, and he was an excellent storyteller. A real artist. Mildred tried to talk to Vivian, to ask him about his travels, but the boy only shrugged his shoulders. He doesn't take me anywhere. Vivian rarely even said the word father. Mildred was getting more and more accustomed to Aaron Jager and looked forward to meeting him at the table. They all ate breakfast separately. More often than not, Mildred came down to the kitchen while Pete, the servant who had opened the door for her, was gathering breakfast for the boy on a tray. It was always the same: a mug of oatmeal on a white plate, an egg in a special silver shot glass, and apple juice. Mildred poured herself a strong cup of coffee, took a cookie from the vase, and went back up to her tower to enjoy it all. And her room, well, pure Middle Ages, like in a museum. And the first rays of sunlight that lay on the floorboards, and the boundless forest that stretched around the castle, and excellent coffee, which not only made her heart beat faster, but seemed to grow wings behind her back. Then Mildred tutored the boy. She showed him cartoons or simple children's movies in English, translating them briefly, and trying to make him understand the characters. Often by lunchtime, Aaron Jager was free, and sometimes Mildred did not even notice that she was eating, engrossed in conversation with him. It had been a long time since she had felt that another person was so interested in her, unless it had been her parents when she was a child. But that had been different, and more often in the evening, Aaron Jager would ask her out. It meant that they would go by car far away, to the city. Mildred had never been to those famous restaurants before. What was the point of going there alone? And it was very expensive. Had never sat in the best seats in the theater. She realized that the master should not have such relations with his son's teacher, that Erin Jaeger was openly courting her, and consoled herself with her mother's admonition, "Don't be a fool, glue him together." It seemed to be the first time she'd ever done it, and Mildred was getting uncomfortable with Vivian. Perhaps the boy would have to explain sooner or later that she and his father had a special relationship. Somehow he would react to that. Mildred had dreamt of the young man who lived in the woods from time to time. She had never been so at ease with anyone as with him, as if nothing bad could happen to her in his presence. Now Vince came to her in her dreams less and less often compared to Erin Jaeger. Everyone else seemed surprisingly bland. It would be boring to be around them. When Erin Jaeger proposed to her, Mildred had thought she had said yes to him a long time ago. As it turned out, it was her turn to be the first to tell Vivian, as well as the fact that after the wedding, a very modest family affair, they would go on a trip. The two of them, of course, Erin had told her yesterday. Perhaps he thought the boy's presence would be a burden to her. Mildred worried how Vivian would take it, but the boy only fluttered his long eyelashes. He averted his eyes immediately, as if he didn't want the teacher to read anything in his gaze. He remained silent for a moment, and then said, quite unexpectedly, to her, Has he shown you his collection yet?" Mildred was so surprised that Vivian had spoken to her on his own initiative that the meaning of the phrase came to her a little later. "Oh, collection? No, what are you talking about?" He jerked his chin, showing that he did not want to continue the conversation on this subject, and began to read the English words again. Clearly, audibly, but without any expression, purely mechanically. It seemed that the foreign language was still as foreign to him as ever, in spite of Mildred's best efforts. Neither Erin Jaeger nor his chosen one wanted to organize anything like a modern wedding, with a restaurant, guests and forgive me, a toastmaster. Mildred even informed her parents that she was married after the fact. As a wedding present, Erin gave her a very beautiful lace dress, which, as Mildred suspected, was unthinkably expensive. They were married at the registry office in the presence of a couple of his friends, whom Mildred saw for the first time that day. One of these friends drove the newlyweds to the airport. They spent 2 weeks in the Seychelles, and Mildred, who had never traveled abroad until then, was utterly enchanted. And the islands, some of which remained uninhabited, and the friendliness of the locals, with whom she easily found a common language, and the cuisine. She had never tasted such outlandish dishes, and what to say? Her love, as she thought that for the first time in her life really loved. One thing that surprised her was that in these 2 weeks, Erin had never once thought of her son. Mildred herself thought of the boy much more often. She browsed the local stores for souvenirs that might appeal to Vivian. She worried about whether Pete was taking good care of him, whether the servant would know what to do if the boy got worse. She even called Vivian, surprising her husband. But when she heard the boy's calm, polite, and cold tone, just as she always did, she called herself a fool and abandoned thoughts of her ward for the time being. She didn't want to go back terribly. It was as if there had been one life perfectly fairy tale-like on the islands, and the other seemed like a dream. Did crowded cities and cold weather still exist? The departure seemed to Mildred like the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise. She was comforted by the fact that the castle was now her home, and that in a sense the prose of her days was. When they returned, Mildred carried a huge bag of presents to Vivian. She really missed the boy. She wanted to hug him, ruffle his hair, and she told herself it was a good thing the child was becoming her own. But the boy didn't seem to have any intention of changing his attitude toward her. He thanked Mildred politely, but was in no hurry to get the boxes and bags. It was like he didn't care. "Oh, are you feeling all right?" he asked anxiously. It seemed to her that the child had lost even more weight and turned pale. And she decided to tell Erin something should be thought of for Vivian as well. Maybe some kind of sanatorium, even in another country. For that matter, I'd have to find out. There must be some, like summer camps, but for kids with special needs. You can't raise a boy so he can't socialize with his peers. But that evening, just as she was about to start this conversation, her husband turned to her. "I would like to show you something very dear to me." And Mildred was frankly surprised. She thought she had seen everything in the castle already. And at the same time, she involuntarily remembered Vivian's phrase. "Has he shown you his collection before?" "What?" she asked with a smile. "Let's go." He took her hand and lifted her from the table in one strong movement, and drew her after him with the eagerness of a child who wants to show her something, the most beautiful thing in his opinion. They walked to the wing of the castle where Mildred had hitherto been least often seen, but the smile still remained on her lips. She was preparing herself for anything. A collection, but what could he collect? Such an unusual man. He'd do it, maybe gems or even meteorites, wine, shells, anything. This corridor seemed quite short, and there was only one door in it. This time Aaron didn't bother to let it go through. He unlocked the lock, stepped into the room first, turned on the light, and only then said to Mildred, "Come in." It took her a moment to realize what she was seeing. When she did not rush away because her feet were stuck to the floor. At first she thought the room had glass walls, but no, they were terrariums, floor to ceiling, standing side by side, and they were all brightly lit now, and inside, it didn't even seem like the spawn of nightmares. She'd never had such terrible dreams. Huge spiders of all colors lived their lives here. The movements of their legs so fast, so elusive. Black, glossy, shiny, with patterns on their backs, and spiders whose legs were like bones stripped of flesh, and furry monsters that seemed, but it was impossible, to stare right at her. And snakes too, of all colors and sizes in such close proximity that the sheen of their scales hypnotized Mildred. Even a cobra seemed to be there, just a hand's reach away, and some other insects too. Strange ones she'd never seen before. Aaron's smile would have outshone the sun if he hadn't looked like one of his pets. That huge spider. She'd never thought of such a comparison before. "I have the most dangerous creatures on the planet here," he informed her, glowering and not noticing that Mildred was paralyzed with terror. He continued almost enthusiastically, Yes, the cobra, the king cobra. After its bite without antidote, 60% of people die. It can even kill an elephant. And this one's even better. Look how good Tipan McCoy is. It'll offer a whole cocktail of paralysis and death. There's no more poisonous creature. Spiders, now that's just the Black Widow. Its bite is not to be feared except for children and the elderly. For them, it can be fatal. Another thing is the traveler spider. That's the one that'll give you paralysis, and this one's a real cutie. You can hold it in your hands. And grabbed a huge spider covered in bright blue hairs out of the terrarium. The last thing Mildred thought before consciousness left her was, "I want to die before this thing touches her." Mildred didn't think she could cry so much. Desperate sobs are like a thunderstorm. They come and they pass. And she sat there, trying to breathe inaudibly, not to sob, and the tears kept pouring. She could only cry. What else could she do? Now the scandal she had tried to make seemed ridiculous to her. She had never been able to swear before, and now she tried it. To her misfortune, "I can't live with these things in the same house," she said to her husband, letting him know it was a final ultimatum. And he just smiled at her like a child. "You see how far away they are, how securely locked up. You won't see them again if you don't want to. And I've never had much luck in my life. I've never met a woman who wasn't afraid of spiders. It's not because you locked them up tight. It's that gun that hangs on the wall that's bound to go off someday, once every 100 years, but you forget to lock the door and someone will escape. That's no more likely than one of us getting killed by lightning." But Mildred, who had never fainted before in her life, could not forget what she had seen. Those countless moving paws whose movements she could not foresee. Those cold, fixed eyes, those rustles. "I can't live here," she said, more convinced of this than of anything else in the world. "Either move your collection to some other place, or I'll leave here." "But my dear, that's impossible," he said curtly, and at the same time with a force that did not yield to her protest. Mildred did not even bother to ask why. One thing she realized was that he valued his collection as much as, and probably more than, she did. "Then I'll call my father and ask him to pick me up." Mildred mentioned her father unconsciously. At that moment it seemed to her that she had no other people left but her parents. And wouldn't she ask her mother? She seldom disturbed her father, but now it was worthwhile. He would be able to talk to her husband, man to man. "I'll call," she repeated, and only smiled radiantly. But he thought she saw a cold, sparkling madness in his. The phone was out of place. Not in her purse, not under the pillow where she'd put it at night, not in the bathroom. Mildred searched the whole room, realizing more and more clearly that she would never find it. She wanted to talk to her husband immediately, but she was afraid to look for him. What if she saw the door to the east wing ajar? What if he came out of there with one of his favorite pets in his arm? He must be of the same blood as them, and not afraid to take them in his arms. The rage that was flooding her soul was looking for an outlet. So a woman who hates the drunkenness of her husband, once again seeing him in a hangover, ready to attack him. But she said, "Wait, now it is useless to talk to him. When he sobers," and Mildred now wanted to say that she would not stay here a minute, that she herself will file for divorce. But the silence in the house told, "Wait. Wait till he comes to you himself." She walked up and down the stairs and down the hallways until at last she saw her husband in the study. You would have thought he had been working on his laptop for a long time. He seemed completely absorbed in what he was writing, but Mildred knew he hadn't been here a quarter of an hour ago. "Where's my cell phone?" she asked from the doorway. "Don't tell me you didn't take it." Suddenly he chuckled, as if he were playing an extremely funny joke, a practical joke. He giggled and couldn't stop, and she suddenly realized how dependent she was on him. That's okay if need be. She'll walk away. Aaron could barely get it out. "Buzzling has your phone." He decided to call too. "Oh, who has it?" She was stunned. Boomslang. "That's the snake I brought back from the Seychelles. You didn't even notice." And no one noticed even on the airplane. Oh, there are ways. You can't imagine how beautiful it is. It's got these big green eyes that no human being can match, and she's so sly. All the locals know, and I know, that its poison is deadly. Only 3 milligrams is enough. There was no escape from this snake before, and the antidote is only now available. But this sly one, my husband was choking with laughter. It can grab you with a dry bite. That is, just prick you with its teeth, without injecting me. DUNU a rush, go crazy, demand serum and blood transfusion, although you really nothing threatening. Conversely, if the snake bites for real, it could be hours before you feel symptoms. Your blood vessels will already be destroyed, and then stroke and death. Also, God forbid you mistake a baby boomslang for a juvenile. The former is harmless, whereas the latter, boom, and that's it. He will guard your cell phone very well, I assure you, and you won't. Try to take it away. That sly little thing is so possessive. What falls to her is gone. Put her hands over her ears. It seemed to her that she would go mad at the mere sound of that voice, in which there was no human intonation left, only to leave immediately, even if she didn't take anything with her, to run or to crawl, but to leave. But Aaron had not finished his game yet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something. First, he showed a clenched fist. Then he opened it. In the palm of his hand was and the door is locked. He almost sang out, enjoying the fact that everything had succeeded. But Mildred began. "And you mustn't spite me," he said, suddenly serious, "or I'm afraid one of my pets will bite you. And then you'll be hovering around me like a bird to get me to give you the cure." "I'd rather die," Mildred promised. Did she think that the only person she would be able to talk to here would be the little boy who had been so annoyed by her presence? When she came to Vivian and sat down in a chair beside him, utterly murdered, crying, and not even trying to make conversation about English, the boy was drawing. For a minute, they were both silent. Then he said, without turning his head, "Oh, I see, he showed you his collection. How do you live here?" Mildred asked suddenly to herself, "I don't know how I can sleep in this house now. I'll feel as if someone were climbing on the blanket, getting close to my face." Vivian colored in his drawing of the sky, pressing hard on the blue crayon. "Oh, you'll get used to it," he said at last. Bree shook her head, which obviously meant no. Then she asked, "Aren't you afraid of them at all?" "Oh, look at my door." It was the first time she'd noticed this self-evidently internet detail. It was only when she looked more closely that she noticed that the door, together with the jamb, represented something special. Mildred went over and closed it. "All right." And there was a threshold on the floor. Not even a How did he agree to put one of those in for you? She pondered aloud, not realizing that she was calling her husband he as if he were a stranger. It's just that he knows that if he wants to, he'll bring anyone here himself. Outwardly, Vivian's voice remained as calm. Does he take them in his hands? He has these gloves, like metal gloves, like some kind of flexible alloy. I don't know, elbow high. And yeah, he takes them. Why? Mildred could barely say it, too scared to know the answer. Vivian looked up at her. He loves them, it seems. But if he wants to punish someone, he'll introduce that person to his friends more closely. You won't die. He has antidotes for all the bites. The most important thing is not to show you're scared. I was scared at first, but then I don't care anymore. It happens though that you suffer for a while. You get a headache and it makes you sick. My God, how can you do this to me? My own son. He's not my father, Vivian said, without any emotion. I don't know how many times he married. But my mom, it was, well, a woman with a child. And where is she now? The boy shrugged. He told me my mom didn't like it here, and she really wanted to leave. He let her go, but he left me to make sure she didn't blab about the whole thing anywhere. See how well she listened to me. He said she never came after you. But I don't think my mom would have left me. So I don't know if she's alive or not. Why did he leave me? He doesn't have kids. Maybe he wants an heir, at least one like me. Or maybe I'm just a lab rat, or maybe he just wanted to invite his next victim. You were hired for me. Bird cried until late that night, and she didn't know where to spend the night. Now she could not set foot in her luxurious bedroom unless she made a great effort. Not that she was afraid her husband would come to her, cradling some deadly snake as gently as a child. She had already associated him herself with one of the exhibits in his collection. The scariest exhibit of all, she wanted more than anything to lie in the same room as Vivian, at least on the doorstep, but she knew that wasn't an option. For one thing, her husband had keys to all the doors. He could open any of them. Secondly, he could punish the boy for being too frank. What did Vivian want? As it was, the lad was barely warm. In the end, she lay down at her place, wrapped herself in a blanket with her head wrapped up, and pretended to be asleep. The blanket was so thick that it might not be bitten. It was better to be stuffy. Mildred heard her husband come in and settle himself at the other end of the bed. She lay holding her breath until he fell asleep. But then she couldn't sleep either. She pondered her escape options. It was clear the front door was locked. The bars on the windows had not pleased her at first, but her husband had told her, "Darling, there have been cases of thieves breaking into the house before. Nothing serious, just some scum who just want to take the first thing they see and drink it or trade it for dope. Besides, I'm away a lot, and if I put an alarm system on, they'll be here before they react. Believe me, you'll soon stop noticing those bars." She did. But now the castle was finally starting to feel like a prison. The only thing she realized was that it was useless to make scandals and demand something from this madman. Most likely, he would decide to punish her, and she wouldn't stand for it. She just won't, that's all. She shuddered at the thought of what she might be threatened with. "Vivian," she asked the boy the next day, "have you tried running away from here?" He wheeled around in his wheelchair in front of her, back and forth a little, but it was enough for her to realize what a fool she was. "And if you do succeed," he said, "he'll destroy me first. He's afraid you'll bring the police here. They'll find me." "Oh, but have you even thought about it?" she asked, almost desperately. Vivian was silent. Later, Mildred realized that he was considering whether to reveal to her the plan he had been hatching, which was his only hope of salvation. A plan he couldn't carry out without help. Vivian looked at Mildred with the eyes of an old man and felt sorry for her. "There's a back door," he said, "but only Pete uses it. Because that door opens and there's a bridge and a river. Pete likes to fish, but he's only got an inflatable boat. But you can't get to the oars. The boat's over there on the dock, and he's got the oars. That's okay. The river has a fast current. It'll carry him far without oars. And by the time they grab him, they say there are people downstream. Someone will notice. I don't know how to get there from here, only to move the horses. He won't reach us in the next world." "Oh, shall we try it?" Mildred asked in a low voice. Now she was ready to overestimate her husband, and to think that in every corner of the castle they were being watched and overheard. Vivian looked past her into the window, which was barred by a grate. Mildred suddenly realized how small and weak he was. Take his hand. There is almost no strength in it. And yet he had not yet given up hope of outwitting this madman. And Mildred also knew now that she could not leave here alone, and might have thought her resigned. just withdrawn. Her wife no longer objected to him, nor did she even speak to him herself, only answered his questions, and she avoided his company at all costs. Now he often found her with a book or needlework in the farthest corner of the house, where she sat until she had to give lessons to Vivian, or sit at the table, or take her place in the bedroom. He couldn't imagine how monstrous his touch was to her now. Or perhaps on the contrary, he imagined it and enjoyed it. So blissful was he in showing others his pets and reading the horror and disgust on their faces. Mildred sometimes thought with bitter humor that maybe karma would work, and Aaron's next wife would be a female herpetologist who would deal with his deadly menagerie and she also knew that the hour of escape was approaching, and that she and the boy would have only one chance to get out of here free. Only 2 days left, she thought, but from the very beginning things did not go as she had envisioned. Pete really was a fishing enthusiast. Perhaps there was no other entertainment for him here. There was plenty of work to do, and Aaron Jaeger didn't want any other servants. Only a few times a year, the workers came to tidy up the garden and clean the house. Everywhere except that very wing, there were only 2 keys to the door to the little underworld, as Mildred had dubbed it, the master and his servant. They could not fall into any other hands. Still, in summer, almost every day, and in winter, when there was no frost, Pete went to the river to meditate for an hour or 2 with a fishing rod. Not once did any fish he caught appear on the table, and there was nothing worthy of attention in the little river for small fish, cat's delight. Now Mildred kept her eyes on the servant and was convinced that Vivian had indeed pointed out to her the only way of escape. The main entrance was clearly visible from any window, and the gate was locked, and the fence, topped with metal spikes, wasn't much of an escape route. The kitchen was another matter. Apparently, it never occurred to any of the unwilling prisoners of the castle to get to this semi-cellar and then unlock the inconspicuous door and climb up the ladder. There was almost no shore on this side, but there was a boardwalk, and the inflatable boat was always waiting for its owner. Mildred knew that on the last day of the month, Pete got a day off. He would leave for town late the night before and return 24 hours later. Who he was visiting, who was waiting for him. So unsociable, so self-absorbed, God only knew. So an escape could only be planned for that time. Pete didn't lock the kitchen and left the food he had prepared for the owners in the refrigerator. It was Mildred's job to do the housekeeping. There were times when she stayed up until nearly midnight washing dishes and putting things in order. When she came back upstairs, her husband was asleep. If things had gone on as before, Mildred and Vivian would have escaped. They wouldn't have been searched for until morning. What search at night? They'd be long gone by then. "Oh, can you come downstairs?" Mildred asked the boy. "Can you get to the kitchen?" "Oh, if I'd known it was going to burn out, I'd have crawled down on my hands and knees," said the boy. To keep the noise down, Mildred thought, or maybe it would be better if I came up behind you and carried you in my arms. You're light, and if all of a sudden, say you wanted to sit with me in the kitchen while I clean up, chat, drink tea. Vivian sighed so heavily that his breath was more like a spasm. On the evening of the evening in question, it looked as if his fate would be decided, whether he lived or not. And he knew it. For the remaining couple of days, Mildred lived with bated breath. She made no objection to her husband and behaved like a mute shadow. Only once did her eyes show confusion. When setting the table, Pete wondered whether he should take a day off this time. "Oh, well, I'll go," he finally decided. "My friend's been asking me to visit him for a long time." This meant that tomorrow Mildred would take Pete's place. And she turned to her husband with the most innocent voice. "Perhaps you would like me to prepare something special," and made a sign with his hand that it was not worth the trouble. He had no doubt that the servant had made sure that the dishes were ready long ago and were just waiting to be served. Pete glanced at his watch. "Oh, it would be good for me to leave early today," he said anxiously. "The weather is getting worse." "Oh," Mildred tried to give her voice a careless tone. "I'll clean and wash everything myself." And in confirmation of her words, she began to collect dirty plates in a few minutes. She caught her husband's attentive gaze and shrugged her shoulders. After Pete left, Mildred spent a long time in the kitchen, looking for new jobs. She was scrubbing the spotlessly clean stove for the 10th time, or rearranging the jars and boxes in the cupboard. And looked in, and she told him, "I've got a lot more to do here. Lie down, don't wait for me." She herself decided to go after Vivian after midnight. because at that time her husband was always already asleep. But what a bad night it had been. Even here in the kitchen, through the thick walls and double frames, she could hear the rain pounding outside. Then Mildred thought with horror that the boat might not be there. What owner would leave it on the shore in such bad weather? The venture seemed to her quite mad. What if she went out now and looked? There was a door. The door to the outside might be locked. Mildred felt a chill. She was not a burglar. She could not open the lock with a stiletto, and it was unlikely to be broken. Everything was so securely made here. But the lock yielded obediently when she grasped it. But what was happening outside? It was raining. Mildred ducked and ran to the dock and caught her breath when she saw the boat hidden under the shed.
Yet even escape was half the battle. Would she and the boy, who almost 100% likely couldn't swim, get to the nearest place where people lived? I don't care, Mildred said to herself. If not to the village, at least to the shore. I'll carry him on my hands from here.
She came back, wet as a mouse, and heard her husband's voice. Please, finish up. It's late. Oh, don't wait for me. Finish it, he repeated with pressure. God, where did you get so wet? He was already on the threshold, and Mildred had no choice but to make frantic excuses. I love a big thunderstorm. I couldn't resist. I wanted to have a look. He only shook his head and, taking her hand, led her into the bedroom. Mildred consoled herself with the fact that she had not made him so angry that he had resorted to punishment. And then she lay in bed beside him, listening to the big clock chiming softly, measuring half an hour, an hour. It was now the second hour of the night, and the storm seemed to be subsiding. Mildred knew that Vivian was waiting for her. He had not gone to bed. They had agreed, waiting, and he didn't know what was wrong, why she wasn't coming. Several times Mildred tried to get up, but her husband held her arm unconsciously in her sleep, and she was afraid to pull harder to wake him. It was already beginning to get light when she managed to get out of the bedroom. She moved as silently as a spirit. As she was in her nightgown, she flew upstairs, grabbed the sleepy boy in her arms, and started downstairs. Sneaking almost without breathing, she reached the kitchen, opened the door. The rain was almost gone, but it was freezing cold, and she had nothing to wrap the boy in. And Mildred said to herself again, I don't care. Even if we get sick, we'll be cured. Just to get out, just to get out. She had never been in a boat before in her life, never had to. And now she lowered the boy into it. Make yourself as comfortable as you can, she said to him. Now perhaps she had to sit down herself. Or not. First push the boat away from the shore, and then get into it. What if it was deep? What if this tiny little boat, like a toy ship, is swept up by the current? Mildred hesitated for a few moments, not knowing what to do, and then she saw Vivian's upturned face and his look of horror. She turned around, letting go the edge of the boat. Her husband was standing behind her back, staring there past her at the boy. Surely he was sure his wife would never leave him again. And here's the bastard. And then, with a last hopeless and desperate movement, she pushed the boat, falling into the water so that the river covered her head for a few moments, and pulled her out with a single tug. He raked the shirt down her back so that the wet straps dug painfully into her shoulders. He drove Mildred in front of him in jerks, ignoring the fact that she was stumbling, ready to fall at any moment. She realized that this was almost certainly the end of it for her now, but she was even more afraid for the boy. The last moment she'd seen him, the boat had been swept out of the middle of the river, and Vivian really couldn't swim. It was a small room, maybe 5 or 6 feet. There were no windows, so it wasn't really a room. It was a closet painted a dark red color, and pushed Mildred inside with such force that she fell to the floor. And she didn't even try to get up, huddled in a corner, covering her face with her hands. She was so scared she felt like she was going to throw up. Did you want him to drown? It struck her that her husband's voice remained as smooth and calm as ever. He seemed to have no doubt that nothing irreparable had happened. Mildred was entirely in his power, and Vivian, what of Vivian? The boy was unknown in the neighborhood. The fact that he was going to die was a free hand for this man. He wouldn't have to deal with it himself. And the child's death would never be linked to him. Mildred sobbed hysterically, sobbing, so it had all failed. She hadn't gotten out of the trap herself, and she'd killed the boy who trusted her. She heard the metal door slam shut. God knows how long she'll be in that closet. Maybe for the rest of her life. Her parents would remember her, of course. The first one must be her mom. But that may still be a very, very long time from now. Her folks think she's happily married. So much so that she's forgotten about them, doesn't even call, and they don't want to bother her. So they won't realize until it's too late. She heard footsteps approaching and froze. The door had opened. Mildred caught herself that her vision had become somehow peculiar. She did not see the whole picture. All she saw were hands shining with a metallic luster. A snake wriggled in each one. They were small, these snakes, and each one her husband looked at with love. They were truly of the same blood as him, and lowered his pets to the floor, very gently, as if he were dropping off children. Mildred could not make a sound out of horror. Even if she had tried, it would not have worked. She got up and stood huddled in the corner, not realizing what she looked like from the outside. Her mouth hanging open, her eyes bulging out of their orbits, and smiled, closed the door, and flicked the light switch. The room went dark. The darkness was absolute. The car pulled into a small village, one of those villages that at best gets a bus once a day. That's why the black, obviously expensive Jeep attracted the attention of all the inhabitants who happened to see it. The car stopped near the church. The man behind the wheel and the woman next to him sat silently for some time. The man's appearance was memorable. Curly black hair with light graying, narrow and somehow long face, light green eyes under moving eyebrows. The woman was wearing dark glasses. She looked as if she had been seriously ill. "I guess you are dear to me after all," said the man. "You see, I let you go alive. What should I have entered your place 10 minutes later? Or just stand over you without doing anything?" The woman didn't utter a word. Her face remained as still as ever. "All right, go," the man allowed with a sigh. "You will walk 20 steps and there they are, beggars sitting. You can join them. Or a kind person will find a kind person and call your parents to pick you up. But remember, if you say a word about me, you'll sign your sentence. No one can prove that what happened to you is my doing. I'll prove that you're crazy and obsessive compulsive, and after that, I promise you, either you or someone close to you will meet a snake somewhere. A pretty little snake that can send you to the grave faster than a lightning strike. Maybe one of you will find one under your pillow, or in your mailbox when you reach for the newspaper, or just in your shoe. Those snakes can get in anywhere. And to keep them away from you, all you have to do is keep quiet." The woman continued to stare in front of her. The man bent over, opened the door on her side. "Go ahead," he said. She got out of the car awkwardly. And then he had to get out too, taking her by the shoulders and giving her a little push, pointing in the direction. That way, the woman walked with an uncertain, stumbling step. As she approached the beggars sitting at the temple entrance, the man started the motor and drove off.
Mildred knew that the darkness would stay with her forever. The antidote had kept her alive, but not her sight. Apparently something was irreversibly damaged in her until a few weeks ago, when she realized she was still alive. She had cursed fate and wondered how she could get her hands on herself. Because as a blind prisoner, her existence would be far worse than death.
Why Erin had decided to let her go, she did not know. In general, Mildred felt like Lazarus, the one who had been to the other world and returned. Drunk or something. She heard voices.
Mildred realized why people thought so. It was because of her wobbly, unsteady gait.
Give happy holidays, just in case. Someone dragged on, thinking that she might have. Mildred finally made it, grasped a church fence with both hands. Then she turned around. There she would stand, along with the other beggars. What to do next, she didn't know. And until the last moment, she wasn't sure her husband would let her go. "Where did you come from?" The woman's voice was angry. "Don't you have anything to eat?" Asking for Christ's sake. "You're dressed so well." Mildred didn't know what she was wearing. Just some dress. Her husband zipped up the back this morning. "I guess I should have reached out and said something like this. Like all these people, have pity." Mildred didn't know the name of the village she was in now. But in any case, to get to her father or mother, she would need some money. She tried to remember their phone numbers, but the numbers danced in front of her eyes, confused, and she wasn't sure of anything. And the only address she could remember was the apartment where they had once lived together. She was sick, very sick. Someone put a coin in her palm, and only by touch, by the size of the money, Mildred could determine that it was 5 rubles. She wanted to do something to thank those who had given her the money. She could not kiss their hands, could she? She couldn't even see the hands. So she sang, "Your voice will come back to you in your time of need." She remembered someone's almost forgotten words. Mildred was prepared to sing in a voice that was broken and wrong, that the same beggars would ask her to be silent, but she was sure to be swept up and carried along. She did not know spiritual songs, and how could she know them? Romances came to mind, and for some reason she remembered their words, about white acacia bunches and black eyes, and about how she sat in anxiety at the open window. Her voice was gaining and gaining strength, so that she herself became afraid. Was there a limit to it, or did it rise from earth to heaven? Someone nearby cried thinly, pitifully, but it was not a child, some old woman most likely. And then Mildred was taken by the arm, and a man's voice asked, "What is your emergency?" "It's the priest, Father Alexander," it suggested in a whisper from somewhere off to the side. Apparently, everyone had already realized that the singer was blind. "And so, here's the money they threw at you. I collected it. Put your hands up." And then she was sitting somewhere in the temple because it smelled like incense. And the phone number she remembered turned out to be right. And her mother cried into the phone and said she was going to pick her up. She was on her way. Probably not even the impressionable cleaning lady at the police department believed her story. Mildred said she had a fight with her husband and left. Yeah, just like that, in a fit of emotion, just up and left to spite him. Didn't even call a cab, went through the woods to town. And got lost, of course. I think someone bit her, probably a snake, because she was sick for a while. And she doesn't remember a lot of things, or like how she ended up in this village. She probably got a ride from someone. You realize this isn't even a white thread. The white threads were just put on top. Finally, the investigator couldn't stand it. "You're lying to me. Who are you protecting? Who are you afraid of?" "That's all I know," Mildred repeated mechanically, like an automaton. The only reason she was left behind was because she didn't want to press charges against anyone. It was easier for the police. They found her, she was alive, and that was all right. Mildred's father insisted that the coroner call her husband. But Aaron wasn't at home, and faithful Pete, shrugging his shoulders, said he didn't know where his master had gone, or for how long. He doesn't report to me. The medical examinations were of little use. The parents saw that their daughter had changed dramatically, from a blossoming girl to a colorless woman of indeterminate age. The doctors said that there were no critical changes in the body. In time, Mildred would get stronger, the nevroses could be brought under control. As for her eyesight, well, people live blind. Mildred didn't have to think about what to do now, how to make a living. She got a disability, but that wasn't the answer, of course, and it wasn't even the little money. Mildred would go crazy locked up in four walls, so she accepted when she was called to the House of Culture. She was organized as a leader of some fake circle, but in fact she became a decoration of all the evenings and concerts. After a while, people went to see her, and then she was invited to sing at a big concert on the main stage of the city. There was television, rave reviews wrote, and journalists. Mildred prophesied a career, asked if she did not want to try to be treated abroad, surprised that she does not suffer at all-star disease. And it seemed to her that all the worst happened to her yesterday, that not a year has passed, and one night. And this fear settled in her soul, tormented her more than the darkness before her eyes. He couldn't believe it when he saw her on the news feed. He hadn't had a television in his house for a long time, and he didn't read newspapers, but he used the internet as his only window to the world. Leaving Mildred to her fate, he saw two possibilities. Most likely, she would contact her parents and live very quietly, dependent on her mother. It would be a struggle for survival, like other people with severe physical disabilities, or she will not want to upset her loved ones, to show them what she has become. Then she will hobble around for the rest of the century, or she will end up in some boarding school for the disabled or just get drunk. There's no third way. But when he saw her in the picture, getting out of the expensive car, when he recognized Mildred, even though she wore dark glasses, his rage rose up in him. She had managed to fool him after all. He had found no trace of the boy. He had not been seen alive or dead since his escape, and Mildred herself had settled down well, while he, on the other hand, was forced to live quietly, without attracting attention. It wasn't fair. And for a moment, He realized that justice had to be done. Himself, the instrument of retribution he chose was the very snake of which Mildred had spoken. Small but fast as lightning, death would come no later than 45 minutes after the bite. No one would even know to find an antidote in that time. He was so absorbed in his idea, so focused on it, that the plan came together very quickly. The snake would fit in the case, and it would be so easy to hide it among the bouquet of flowers. When was the next time the newfound star would take the stage? He looked at the playbill and almost laughed. She was supposed to perform on an outdoor stage in a city park. If anything, he could hide unnoticed in the crowd, or maybe he'd want to stay and watch the performance to the end, so she could finally go to the other world, where she'd be waiting for him to go before his eyes. It will be easy, because she won't see him. She won't realize who handed her the bouquet. And at that very moment, he'll open the case. Every morning when Mildred woke up, the first thing she did was to sing some musical phrase, checking to see if the voice had disappeared. She saw it not as something inalienable that would stay with her forever, but as a miracle that came to her, a miracle that lasted and lasted and lasted. This is how Indian summer, the gift of autumn, can be delayed for a week or two, but every morning you look anxiously outside the window. Whether the clear warm weather has not changed to endless cold rain. For this concert, her mother had chosen her a long light dress with a wide belt. She assured her that it suited Mildred very well. Mom had learned to drive the car too during that year. They arrived shortly before the concert began, and while they waited, they sat near the stage on a bench that was drowned in lilac bushes. Mildred was silent, and her mother did not disturb her, realizing that her daughter should tune in to the performance, to that high mental elevation without which it is impossible for a true artist to go to the audience. And then came a woman organizer, and taking Mildred under the arm, led her to the stage, helped her up the steps, and left her only after she had put a microphone in her hand. Mildred was called for an encore, again and again, but she only shook her head. The other performers waited their turn. "Come, Sabu," she heard her say. "They are bringing you flowers." It was a rare occasion, if ever one could remember one, when Mildred was not handed bouquets, and here she stood at the edge of the stage, bent over, the flowers in cellophane crunching slightly audibly in her left hand, and to her right one of the admirers pressed his lips. Mildred froze. She recognized that scar, those scarred lips. "Vince," she said almost fearfully. Is that you? Wait, I'll be right down." She knew which way to go, where the stairs were by the stage. And near the stairs she was picked up by someone's strong hand. And now she is already standing on the hard ground and feels the furry side of the dog. "You're not alone. You have no idea what has happened to me in all this time." "I have no idea," said the voice she happened to remember all this time. "I know. Oh, but how?" "Oh, Vivian told me. He really wanted you to be told he's alive. We've got him. You picked him up. That's how it happened. Our fisherman saw him first. And now he lives with us. He's got no family left. Nobody wants him in the world." Or had put her hands on her head. It was impossible that it could have turned out this way. Vince touched her shoulder. "Oh, they're still bringing you flowers," he said. Later, Mildred tried to reconstruct the picture, but couldn't. She had been standing next to him, but the memory had definitely shattered into fragments. She reached out for the bouquet. A stifled growl, Vincent's shout, a sudden movement beside her, and a heavy groan. And that the blood drained from her face, and the darkness before her eyes began to dissipate, or dog bite, she heard around her. And then she saw him, this terrible man who still appeared to her in her dreams. And now he was lying in front of her in the dust and squirming, tearing his throat with his fingers, as if he did not have enough air, and a small snake was slithering on his body, raised its chiseled head and hissed, warning the others that she was not to be trifled with. People scrambled away, unable to understand. Vincent wanted to draw her away too. He had hardly seen the black foreign visitor before, but Mildred knew the price of its bite. Did she get to the dog before it bit her? Is the dog all right? Right on the lawn, he began to examine the dog. He must be okay. If she'd knocked a man off his feet like that, the dog would be finished. Right there. He had never thrown himself out of the blue before. And then he grabbed his hands and suddenly, out of nowhere, a snake. What the hell was that? He caught Mildred's eye and realized she could see. And she knew that if she went back, If she dared to approach her ex-husband and empty his pockets, there must be an antidote hidden in there somewhere. When taking one of his pets with him, he made sure to take the antidote for its bite. Or, because accidents can happen, he told her it was so long ago in some past life. But now, it could have saved his life. And that vial of antidote is probably the only one in the whole city. I don't think the medics here have an antidote for rare African snakes. Mildred hugged the dog and buried her face in his gray fur. Then Vince, holding her by both hands, helped her up. "Let's get out of here," said Mildred. "Mama's probably looking for me. You can tell me all about it on the way, and you tell me." And they went on, saying something to each other, sometimes interrupting each other. And a gray dog like a wolf trotted along beside them.